Right. Welcome back to Cards and Comics. Today I got a special live stream. Turn on my comments so I can make sure when people come in. But I'm with Carlos here because I'm Carlos, all the way from Canada, joining me on this great Sunday. Big NFL day. Hopefully you're doing well, Carlos. How's it going?
I am doing very well. Been enjoying watching the games this afternoon and this evening. I kind of make a day out of it while I'm in the office. I basically put it up on the screen and while I'm doing some stuff. So it's a lot of fun. Not so great for my team today, but I try to look at the positives. At least some other people also had a bad day, so I get to enjoy that.
Well, it's interesting for me because being in the New York area, liking the Steelers, and watching the Giants come back and win a game. It was mixed emotions. It was kind of fun watching some New York teams play well, but it's just hard for me to root for a lot of the New York teams.
Fair.
Buffalo is definitely a tough one. 'Cause-
Well,
but
right now, New York State for football is not well. The Giants. I think the Giants won today. Could
they
be.
came back and won in a crazy game for sure.
Yeah, but they played a heck. But the point is, they played infinitely better than the first game. So like it was much better. You know, you had nowhere to go but up. But it was a much better performance in the first game. So that's one. Obviously, the Jets had a disastrous, and
Yeah,
that was disappointing for me. I was looking forward to a full. I wanted to watch the Aaron Rodgers saga play out.
hundred
This is it.
percent.
This is all you give me. I wanted more.
Yeah, and especially when you've got the Hard Knocks kind of lead in. It feels like every year the Hard Knocks lead in turns into some boring season of work because it's like it seems like those teams just never really do the hype justice after you watch the whole HBO series. Just shows you how well they edited that HBO series and how the NFL is actually a much harder beast to actually to navigate through for a full season.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I'd agree.
So yeah, so I asked Carlos on because I did a video where I talked about '90s and 2000 sports cards, and Carlos is definitely one of these guys that I look to because he definitely collected through this time period, um, and actively collects after after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my ideas was that in the video I did was that 2000s cards, due to a lot of factors, one of them being the contraction in the hobby, lost a lot of manufacturers. The design's getting more boring because the focus went back to went to autographs and game used. But Carlos, being kind of you do super collecting, you have your Mike Madonna collection. I know you've
Mm-hmm.
been doing a lot of Brett Favre collecting on your Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about the 2000s cards compared to 90s? Like when you start collecting and looking at those cards, do you feel like the 2000s cards are definitely are of different quality or different, let's say, variety?
So I would say, and I'll actually workshop a take that I've been thinking about because when you originally presented me this question, I started thinking about it. And I had this thing in the back of my head, and I'll present it to you tonight. This will be the basis of my thesis, and maybe I'll talk about it more later down the road. But one thought that I had is so yes, they are different quality, but I think part of it is because the emphasis changed. And that plays
Mhm.
into this thesis that I have. And let me quickly explain what my analogy is going to be, but I'll focus on the cards first. But then you'll kind of get I think you'll get what I'm saying after the fact. Because one of the other things that you've covered on your channel, or at least talked about a little bit here and there, is the music piece. And you've got some of the nice songs that you play on your videos and stuff.
I'm glad
But
you noticed.
here's a thought. Here's a thought that I had. This that I think would be kind of interesting and plays well with this exact scenario that you're talking about. My thought is the thing with the 90s is not one consistent period. It is very, you could almost break it up into a couple of slices. And what I
Hmm.
thought was interesting, and then the 2000s, there were some small tweaks. It was more like less of game changing, like in terms of ideas, in terms of ways presenting sets and all that. The 90s, if you start off with the beginning of the decade to the end of the decade, you see this quantum leap, this massive change. And there's a bunch of
Yeah.
factors that play into that. It's not just one thing, it's a bunch of stuff. But now compare in the back of your mind, think about what happened in the 90s in music versus
Hmm.
what happened in 2000s in music. Well, it's the same idea. And it's a
Right.
weird parallel if you think about it, because if I talk to you about what was popular in 1990 and 1991, there was a little bit that it was almost carryover from the 80s. So I just high level, I'm just giving you kind of a general thought here. So you're looking at the late 80s into the early 90s. The difference between those two was less than what would come later. But then you look at like the middle 90s period. So start off at the beginning of the 80s. Hair metal still was alive. Again,
Hmm.
I'm sticking high level, and then by 91, grunge. And then
Right.
again, there's other stuff that happens along the way. But the point that I'm making is you see these major changes, and they happen fast. Once things start moving, change happens fast. You
Right.
look at 95, 94, 95, 96 music. Some of the bands that were the biggest bands in the world suddenly phase out. Other bands stick around or other artists stick around, but they have to change their game. And the game keeps having to change and evolves. But by the late 90s, it doesn't sound like the beginning of the 90s. It couldn't sound any less like the beginning of the 90s for the most part. A lot of what would have worked in 1990 and 1991 was beyond, it was less than 10 years. Or even if
Right.
you go a 5 year period between the beginning of the decade and the middle of the decade, they're almost two different planets that you're living on. Even though it's
Right.
still music, even though there are some familiar names here, some of these names that were mainstays on the charts suddenly drop off.
Right. Well, I think one thing about 90s music and 2000s music, because I know you're a huge music fan, and we definitely have talked a little bit about music taste, and in the 90s for music for me is the fact that that underground, um, music, especially in the metal genre, really became super diverse.
Mm-hmm.
You had just symphonic metal and melodic death metal, and you had all these different things coming out that no one had really heard before. And I think it is a good analogy for cards, because if you look at pre 1993, it was getting kind of some things, but after 93, it was almost like an arms race, because all the manufacturers saw that things become, you have to compete at a higher level. And that's why I look at some of the sets as being like, we never would have saw some of that technology unless there was competition. And I
Mm-hmm.
do think that is one of the things that happened in the 2000s was, as consolidation happened, even if you look at the years Upper Deck was active, they put out less sets, and most majority of their innovation and money was being spent on autographs and game use. They did not really want to make inserts cool or hard to design or cost, because they were spending so much money on the jerseys and the autographs, whether or not they were real or not. That's always been one of those questions in the hobby we've always had, is like how much of that stuff is actually real. But you know, I remember in the days, I'm sure you do too, is like where Donruss would win a major auction, right? For a Babe Ruth jersey, and then they would have a photo of the actual jersey that they cut up on the back of the card.
Yeah.
Um, and all that's gone away. I mean, we don't hardly see any of this kind of stuff anymore. I know Fanatics is talking about bringing it back, but I have no real faith that Fanatics is going to really invest in anything other than experiences and kind of athlete based innovation, not card based innovation. I don't think they care too much about design. It's
So
not.
there's a big
Yeah.
piece of that, but kind of extending this analogy that I'm talking about. So the 90s was dynamic. There was all these
Mhm.
changes and all these different elements that played into it. So the reason I
Yeah.
like this analogy and the reason I pitched it to you is that you saw in both. And another thing that happened in the 90s that changed both was the internet. So you can feel like, eBay suddenly came into play, which
Right.
changed certain things. Certain cars that were impossible. No,
Hmm.
they don't. Do they even exist? Suddenly you could get them on eBay. You could find them. There were
Right.
ways to go about it, and that changed the game. So what I'm
No,
saying
hundred
is, in the
percent.
'90s period, you've got all these things converging in the same space and changing the game all at the same time.
Right.
And in the music thing, Napster, torrents, that changed the industry. So like that period of time, that decade, there was so much happening from the beginning, middle to the end. But then by the time you get to 2000s, there's a little bit of a stabilization. But sticking with cards, when it comes to that, yeah, the game used had become the mainstay. The game used was how the inserts were done. But what I find, and you're right about the innovation piece, you're right about the R&D, you're right about the investing in it. That's part of it. But the other piece of the puzzle is just this: the audience's taste differs. Part of the reason I use that analogy is, okay, let's say you're super nostalgic for 90s music. I am. That was
Hmm.
the era that was my full decade of paying the closest attention to it. In the 2000s, 2000s I've still got some fond memories of some stuff for that too, because
Hmm.
music videos still existed. Again, things have changed between the beginning of that period and the end of that period. But if I say 2000s music to 2010, is there that much of a difference? No, there's a little bit here and there. Like, yeah, there's some stuff that gets introduced, some new bands or musicians come in and out, but did everything fundamentally change? Not necessarily. Between 2010 and 2020, is there like, I would struggle with it. To me, it kind of blurs together. They almost
Yeah.
blur together because they're so very similar. uh, 2000s and cards. You're right that they had consolidated certain things. Like obviously, some companies went bankrupt at the end of the decade of the 90s, But here's the thing: game use became the game, and two
Mm-hmm.
things happened. If we look at the 2000s, 2003, exquisite in basketball;
Mm-hmm.
2005, the cup in hockey. So you already had the premium brand, but now you got like the super duper uber
Super
premium
premium,
brand
yeah.
that is relying on this game used element. But
Oh
now
yeah.
we're in an interesting spot. Go forward now, almost 20 years from that, and where are we sitting right now? It's like the argument is like, well, if you don't invest in the R&D and whatever. But here's the thing: even if I gave you $100 million to play with, what technology can you give me that isn't you? You did a video recently where you talked about the Dufex thing, and that was a
Mm-hmm.
really good example. I love that thing with the Dufex is one of my favorites. But here's the thing: if you give me Dufex in every set right now, it loses its impact. And
Oh
also,
yeah.
I've lived through it the first time, so I'm not that in and of itself is not going to excite me. You
Mm-hmm.
give me some fancy refractor in and of itself, it's not going to excite because I already saw it the first time. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like you can show me something really cool, but in the back of my mind, I'm almost going to be comparing it to the original.
Sure. Sure, but I think that's the thing that's interesting to me is because one of the things I do, I'm a research scientist, so you know the thing that's interesting to me about this industry and this hobby is that it's devolved in terms of technology and
Yeah,
ability
sure.
to create new product. It's very very anti other industries in that way. Very few
I have an
industries.
interesting example I want to give you though that
Yeah.
kind of plays into what you're talking about. So, and I'll share it with you briefly. One thing that Upper Deck has started to do is they've gone back to the well a little bit on certain things, very
Mhm.
specific things. And a recent series actually plays into that. And some of the feedback I've heard is actually very interesting about that. They've been doing the metal
Yeah.
universe for the
Yeah.
last little while, the last couple of years. They brought it back in hockey, and they've also done it in AEW wrestling cards and stuff like that. But one of the things they do, they like to harken back to the nostalgia. One of the subsets they like to do is they'll do the retro, which is based on
Hmm.
the old Metal Universe design, which is very nice. It's a classic.
Right.
They look beautiful. And obviously the PMGs, the precious metal gems, are the big thing.
Hmm.
But one thing that I saw and one piece of feedback that made me laugh from the current crop of collectors, they were complaining about the PMGs. And why were they complaining about the PMGs? Well, they were complaining about the PMGs because they chip too easily, which was a problem
Hmm.
with the original ones as well. It was the same issue.
Yeah.
But also, the other thing they were complaining about is when they did the retro ones, and this is something Upper Deck did in the AEW one and I believe in the hockey one as well. For the retro ones, they use the old numbering system, which is to say the green is numbered to 100, but the first
Oh
10
yeah.
are, but the last 90 are the red.
Right. Rad.
And they were
Rad.
complaining about this and saying, "Well, that's stupid." And it's like, "Well, that's literally how it was.
That's how
That
it
that is
was.
that is that is a harkening back." So, Jason,
Yeah.
they've forgotten. They don't know.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too. Is I think. But I also say you mentioned Upper Deck bringing it back, but I look at those retro sets to bring back and think about.
I said selectively. I was being very
Oh,
specific in the example I was using.
because there's a lot of things that, like for example, the big men on ice cards, right?
Sure.
And how rare they were back in the day versus how many they put in a box today. How they didn't make the card as cool as it used to be. It's just I always feel like today they go like half in. They'll
Mhm.
do cut above like they did in that Metal Universe, like the all the sport one they did, and the cut above is a completely different looking die cut. It was
Yeah.
just, you know, again, I think the thing I'm talking about really though is instead of doing nostalgia all the time,
Mhm.
do cool, innovative new stuff that, like you said, we haven't seen before, or let's do it in a more exciting way. And we're starting to see glimpses of that, right? We're starting to see some of that stuff with tops where they're doing like the hidden gems, which is an insert across all different
Yeah.
products, which it looks, I have a few of those in hand and they look very nice. So it's like,
A callback to
that's
the old
the
epics.
gold
A
book.
callback to the
That's
old
the
epics a
gold
little bit.
book. What's that?
I said a callback to the old epics.
Yeah, it is. But it's, but the thing is like, I do feel like if they went all in with some R&D and actually talked to printers and printing
Mhm.
technology, there's probably something out there we haven't seen yet that they could bring to the table if they truly wanted to. It was just interesting that the hobby doesn't value that as it used to in the 90s. Like I
Mhm.
said, I lived through the 2000s, and believe me, opening a box of cards back in the 2000s, the only thing that people counted as hits in those days was inserts and game used.
Mhm.
If you pulled a bunch of inserts that were numbered out of 4 packs or out of 8 packs or out of 12 packs, no one cared. And that's what happened to me is I quit caring about them too. It became even in my head that, well, if I didn't get a game use or an autograph card, then the box was a bad box. And it didn't matter what the other cards were or if they were numbered and it took me a long time, to kind of get back into the idea that the cards can be cool without being autographed or have a game use piece on it. It did kind of warp our thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
because today the one thing I said in the video was, you look at Bowman Chrome, that started in 2001, and the Pujols they just lucked out and had a generational talent, two of them
Mm-hmm.
actually, but only Pujols had the auto. But that changed entirely how rookies are collected, and it's that way today. It literally what happened in '01 completely changed how we collect, and that's interesting. But if you look at it, it's the same thing year over year, right? It's not really changed much, different colors, but other than that, it's a Bowman Chrome auto, and that innovation really hasn't really gone much any different than it has in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I say in my video too about the '90s cards is that, and I think as a player collector, I'd be interested in your take, is sometimes those sets only existed for 1 or 2 years
Yep.
in the '90s. For example, you think about for baseball, like the established set,
Mm-hmm.
and Fleur Mystique. There was only 1 year that set ever existed, and they've never redone it. I don't think they'll ever redo it again because the technology is expensive. But I think that's what makes that set so cool, right? Is that it only existed for 1 year. And I do feel like that happened a lot in the '90s, where in the 2000s, you take an autograph or game used. Does it really matter what brand it came from? Like, I don't really find people go like, well, it came from Upper Deck Decade of Excellence or Fleer Authority, and that makes it cooler. It's
Mm-hmm.
just an autograph or game used.
So I'll push back on that a little bit, but before I do, let me quickly acknowledge a couple of folks since I can see some of the comments. Good evening, Paul. Good evening, Oak. Good evening, Dufex, because I recognize some of the names, so I want to make sure I said hello. Um, the thing is, I agree with what you're saying to a point. The only thing is, that's why I say, like, the good news for me, and it's very fortunate because now I have the luxury, and this is something I'm going to get to do more now in the coming time, because I'm doing some close work with a card shop based out of Atlanta, Canada, that I'm going to be working with them on a variety of things for the channel and also for what they're doing as well. So I'm going to help them out with that. But part of that also is that I get some insight because as a shop that is working with their distributor, as a shop that's selling product out of there with their website and everything else, I get to kind of pick their brain a little bit and go, hey, what is moving for you? What is people asking about? What are people buying? What's going on with it? Also, how much of it is moving? Because I know
Mm-hmm.
they'll order cases of some product, and my question will be like, okay, so how's it moving? Are people asking about it? And I can kind of do a little, it's a small sample size, but it's one example where I can be like, pick their brain a little, because they also talk to other shops. So it might
Mm-hmm.
be a situation where maybe they sell each other some boxes here or there, or maybe it's selling better on that side of the country than this side of the country, or whatever the case may be. So you can get a little bit of insight on that. But one of the things that I find, and the feedback that their customers who are coming into the store telling them, because that's really useful to get that, frontline feedback, is something that some of my buddies from Upper Deck are finding as well. They're trying to find that balancing act, like what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They agreed that the autograph and game use got played out to the point that it lost some of its significance. But now, when they try to bring the technology or insert back into it, again, we can argue about the technology not being as good as it was, which is, I agree.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing: the current generation doesn't know that anyway. So for them, it's like, yeah, you could give them a watered down version of it, and it's still better than what they were getting before. So,
Mm-hmm.
but the point is, the feedback they're getting isn't that, oh, this is so cool. They're saying, where's my autograph? They're saying, why am I not getting my memorabilia hit? Oh, this sucks. This is a rip
Mm-hmm.
off box. So they're putting these inserts
Yeah.
in there, but also including, you know, case hits and stuff like,
Mm-hmm.
and the upper deck guys are having to then go like, guys, this is literally one per two cases.
Right.
This pull, and it's a nice looking card.
Yeah.
So, or it's an acetate or whatever, and they're having people complain to them that these cards are junk. They don't
Right.
want them. They're like, where's my memorabilia? Where's my autograph?
Mm-hmm.
And they're literally getting that pushback, and they're sitting there going like, when we gave you the autographs, you complained there were too many autographs. Now you want me to give you a $5 autograph instead of a case hit.
Right.
That's what you're asking me for.
Yeah. I do think though that I do think in the 2000s we thought the same way, but we've gone back and looked at some of those cards and said, yeah, some of those were pretty cool. So I'm hoping that at least the upper deck guys realize that in a couple of years people will realize like, well, this insert probably was 1 in 400 packs or one in, something pretty hard to get. So that makes it a lot cooler than that $5 auto that we were kind of bummed out we didn't get. But that happened with a lot of '90s cards. I mean, look at the '90s. Like, as a player collector, with Griffey and and Thomas, is like, I still find cards from the 90s I've never seen before. It's
Mhm. Sure.
insane. Where I see something, I'm like, where did this come from? Like, what set was this? And it's just, and a lot of times it'll be something that, it has a die cut or looks cool, and it's just odd for me to be in that space for so long to see new cards. In the 2000s, I do the same thing where sometimes I see a set, I'm like, well, that's a pretty cool set. I discovered '05 Zenith and I did a little video about that.
Hmm.
But it's just like that happens a lot less for me as often as a player collector. Do I see something from the 2000s where I'm like, wow, that was amazing. But in the 90s, it happens all the time in weirdo sets. You'll just open a box of something like 95 Select, and you're like, wow, there were some really cool inserts in that, and I've never seen them before.
No, I agree. But it's one of those things. Look, it's a combination of an education piece, but at the same time, also on this other side of it, I always have to balance this out because when I do my live stream, I balance it out with folks that I know in the chat who have been around some time. They have some experience in the hobby, so I'm not catering to the 101 crowd, but at the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I'll also get a chance to talk to some folks that are closer to it. They're closer to the 101 crowd not because they never collected, but they stopped collecting in 1994 and then came back all these decades later and they'd missed the complete thing. Whereas I
Oh yeah.
saw the progression all the way along the way. So for me, so I guess maybe I'll put it this way, kind of tying two threads that you're discussing putting together. I'm not so worried about them putting in fancy. I know they're not going to spend the money on the R&D. I just
Yeah.
know, and it's not even a lack of desire. It's and I won't speak too far out of turn, but I've had the chance to talk to a few folks that help kind of design those sets, and they literally say flat out, I get a budget at the beginning, and I
Mm-hmm.
can spend it however I'm going to spend it. This is how much I have, so I have choices to make. If I want to
Mm-hmm.
do memorabilia, this is how much it's going to cost us to do. That's in the budget. I want to do this fancy technology that we're going to try out. Cool. That's going to cost us X.
Mm-hmm.
My budget is X. I got to
Right.
stick within it. So then the question I got to ask myself is, okay, how much is this box going to end up at the end? What is our cost that we're going to try to put into this?
Mm-hmm.
And if your answer is it's going to cost me twice as much as what the price of the box is going to end up being, we can't do it. Even if
Oh
it's the
yeah.
coolest idea in the world, because we can't be losing money on these products. The goal here is to make, so even if it means I got to cut some stuff out or just leave it on the cutting room floor, go, I have an awesome idea. There's probably a
Mm-hmm.
bunch of ideas sitting in a notepad somewhere at
Well,
Upper
I'm
Deck
sure.
and Top's headquarters where they're like, yeah. And the answer is we don't have the budget.
Yeah.
We can't afford
No,
it.
I'm sure there
Sorry.
is. It really comes down to this though for me is, I do think that the tide you're seeing in the hobby, because the a lot of people that are in the hobby now that are in positions of power are collectors, right? You got, Nat
That's a
Turner,
theory.
you've
That's
got,
a theory. Sure.
well, some of them are, right? But
Sure.
I do think that you're going to see people in these positions of power start to really advocate for that nostalgia when they were a kid, but the idea that the cards need to be cool. The cards have to have something more to them than what we've seen in recent memory, and that's why I said I do feel like we are seeing some of that coming through. Will it allow a set to be developed where the memorabilia cards and the game use are kind of secondary? I think Prism was kind of designed that way to begin with, right? It was kind of
Mhm.
like game use, memorabilia cards. You care about the Prism cards, you care about some of the autos, right? And Bowman Chrome is a little bit the same way, It's like, you care about the refractors, right? One of these days, I do think there is going to be a set that they could design where no game use, no autos, but there's something cool enough about the cards that people want to collect them. And I think that's still to be determined, but that would be my hope is that one of these days that people care about the cool design. And I mean, they've tried it with a lot of different ways, right? They tried with the artists, right, with the top 60, and they've tried it a lot of, and that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's that they're just not trying. I just think that, to your point, the lack of budget prevents them from really doing something that is probably more impactful.
Now that one key piece though that I want to make sure we include here, and it plays in that music analogy that I gave earlier. Just because we think it's cool doesn't mean it is. The
100%.
danger here is, yeah, you could. My question would be like, and hypothetical. let's say one of the companies says, okay, fine, Jason, we'll give you what you want. We're going to do the atomic refractors, old school style. We'll do it matrix style, double sided. We'll come up with a new design. We'll do the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we'll do it similar. We won't
Mhm.
screw around with the odds too much. We'll keep it in line with what was done in the past. And what if we get the PMG answer again? Hey guys, that's cool and all. Where's my head?
Sure. Sure. I think that's always going to be the idea because that was the response by people in the 90s, right? Some of the response by the people what opened those boxes was, okay, it's another shiny card, right? I
Yeah.
do think that will always be some other response. I think the idea is this is that if the design is strong enough that people are attracted to it, it's going to have the ability to kind of, let's say, transcend what that card in terms of value. I think that's what you end up looking at because that's I think what these guys look for today is does that card hold value, gain value in the secondary marketplace because of that design? And I think that is what we have to prove out. Because if it
Yeah.
can't, to your point, then why do it, right?
But the key though
Why
is
do
with the manufacturer. If I put my manufacturer hat on, I put a hat
it?
on for manufacturer. Even if you say, hey, but you know what, in 10 years people will really appreciate it. I'm like, well, that will not help our sales today. That
Mhm.
will not help our sales this quarter.
Well,
I
but
can't wait 10
yeah,
years because I don't get a dime of the secondary market. So, Jason, if I can develop a cheap product, aka not cheap, but like
yeah,
if I can stay within my budget, not do any of that, and sell
mm,
50,000 units, or I can do this fancy technology that you're talking about and sell 50,000 units,
right.
but I increase my expense, what difference does it make?
Well, but what happens though, in the hobby though, as soon as that insert becomes popular, and causes a sellout of a product because people all go flocking to it, trying to open it to get that one cool thing. The next year that's released, you know what's going to happen. They can charge more for it. The pre-orders will be higher, and that is how these things kind of happen. Because if you look at sets that's happened to in the past, where the downtowns, for example, when they started pitting some of these kind of inserts and products, that product then started to sell out because people knew in the retail product you could pull this one type of insert and it's worth a lot of money. And I do feel like that is what could happen in that type of environment with these kind of inserts if they chose to do them again. But it would take that secondary market to create that interest, to create that sellout. So you would be right on the year it was released. They wouldn't make any more money than normal. It would have to generate sales in the second and third year for it to be worthwhile. So they'd
And I
have to
think that's a
project something like
possibility.
that.
I think the danger, though, and that's why I gave that PMG analogy a little earlier. I gave that as an
Mm-hmm.
example. There was a moment with all the record sales the PMGs were getting. There was a moment. The reason metal suddenly came back, it got a
Mm-hmm.
resurgence a couple of years back, was because the PMGs were doing so well, right?
Right.
And it's not like no one cares about the PMGs, but if you actually take, that's why I say that I joked about the AW one. Now the AW product is struggling, but I can get some hockey PMGs for a song. They cost nothing.
Yeah.
It, now a top tier player like McDavid or one of those guys,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it'll do very well. If they put a Gretzky in there, yeah, that'll still do well, but it won't do as well as the previous version. It actually
Yeah.
did. It actually did worse. Um, and then with the AEW one, like they were actually hoping, they were banking on the PMG to sell it, even though the property was struggling. I have literally purchased a PMG from the product that was released a couple of weeks ago for $20.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No,
and
I
these
do.
these are case these are
Yeah.
these are supposedly hard hits, and
Yeah.
you
Case
can't get the
hits.
money
Yeah.
back for the box.
Yeah. But I do think though that is sort of the same analogy though is that too much of a good thing still ruins a good thing, right? And if all Metal Universe has going for it is PMGs, at some point people will just quit caring. It was always the mix for me, right? It's always been cut aboves, linchpins. Like they had kind of a stable of really cool insert sets, but
Next
who's
year,
to say they can't design
they're
something
bringing
new
those
like
next year.
the
because
linchpins?
they've done the so now just speaking for what they're done, they brought back Jambalaya,
Yep.
Star Ruby, Cut Above is coming. Cut Above is actually coming for the AW one. They've already put in the little thing for next year, even though they just released the first one. Next year has Cut Above.
Yeah.
Next year has
But
Lynchpins.
is it a good looking cut above? Because man, the ones they did for the last metal set that they did them in was just terrible. Yeah.
I'll have to take a look. But all I'm getting at is that the problem is that we keep hoping. I guess would be the way I would phrase this. Be careful hoping that the current generation will appreciate it for anything other than value. Because the problem is you can make the coolest
Mhm.
looking card in the world, but if it's not valuable or it's not the
Mhm.
hotness at that moment, you're like, yeah, that's great. Who cares? Boom,
No.
toss it. Where's the card? Where's the valuable card?
Yeah, yeah. No, that's always been the case, though, and I think that's why game used and autographs are so safe for the manufacturers to go to in the 2000s because there was inherent collectability and value in those kind of designs that the manufacturers didn't have to convince the audience or the buyers that that card is worth something because it inherently an autograph or game used makes it worth more money just because of that type of collectible. I think that's why it's so much easier for people to think that way. Same way for rookie cards, right? A rookie
Yep.
card that's autographed or game used, inherently the year it's released is going to be more desirable or collectible than 5 or 10 years later when that rookie card probably flames out. But for that short period of time, that is probably the best that card is ever going to be desired. So again, doing rookies, doing autos, doing game use, it made a lot of sense, but it also created this idea of those I call dead sets. You go back in some of those sets in the 2000s, and there's very little collectability in some of those products because either all those players and rookies flamed out, or it's just a bunch of high numbered game use products that don't really inspire a lot of collectability today, like they may have done in those times. So one thing I talk about is Fanatics. What should Fanatics learn from Upper Deck? So Carlos, I'll let you go first. What should Fanatics learn from Upper Deck?
How to do high end. Tops is not
That
actually
would
very
be
good
a
at
good
high
one.
end. Yeah,
That's a good one.
exquisite is a step and a half above what a lot of and I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not going to pretend it is, but I think a lot of what exquisite did is very good. I think it's excellent, really well done. What the cup has done in hockey, I think, is very well done. Again, not perfect. I'm not pretending it is, um, but I think Tops has some cool cards, but
Mm-hmm.
Dynasty, but it's limited. There's some limitations in terms of what they can do with that stuff. Like I said, some of the dynasty cards I think are really cool,
Mm-hmm.
but it's one of those things where Tops has never been. I think they've got Transcendent is another one. Um, the Tops high end brands, which is what Fanatics controls right now, so they have the
Mm-hmm.
Tops brands. The Tops high end brands, ironically, we talked about that whole '90s thing. In 1993, Tops Finest ruled the roost. It was a step above what was going on at the time, and it caught people's attention. But that time has passed. Topps Finest is just now another brand. Chrome is
Right.
just another brand. There's still value, absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
but if we're talking high end, that's one thing. For lower end, there's still plenty they do well, but I
Yeah.
think I think Topps flagship is still a staple. I think still there's still some good classic stuff there for people that are into it and that want it. I think they've done an okay job on that. And even Chrome and stuff like that, I think they've done okay. There's tweaks you could totally make, but high
Mm-hmm.
end Tops just doesn't have the offerings to match up with what Panini is doing with National Treasures and
Right.
Flawless and some of the stuff, and what Upper Deck did with Exquisite back in the day. They just don't have an equivalent that is
Oh,
of equivalent
100%.
quality.
Yeah. I think what Fanatics can really learn from Upper Deck is that um, player exclusives really suck for the hobby. Um, so if they really want to do something for the hobby, figure out some way to get Upper Decks Jordans and the LeBrons inside their sets. Some way to, you know, do something about that exclusivity where, it makes sense for modern day products to actually have the players we really want in the product.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Upper Deck's going to learn. I don't think Fanatics is going to learn from that. They're going to probably, you know, if they keep fighting with Panini, what we're going to have is tons of sets missing key players for
Hey, don't
generations.
ruin this for me. For the content, this is fanatic. This is fantastic. I'm into it. Let's go, Fanatics and Panini. Fight for my amusement. Don't
fight
ruin this for
fight
me.
it out. Yeah, yeah. No, I just from a collector's perspective though, when Michael Jordan became an exclusive, it just really made the basketball card market collecting just die for a couple years. And I do feel like you take away a couple key guys out of a couple sets, and all of a sudden it becomes, a tough because there's not that many generational guys, and if they get locked up to exclusive deals, I think that would really suck for the hobby. So I hope Fanatics tries to work with people in the future to some extent to not make the collectors suffer, but I don't know if they will or not.
I wouldn't hold my breath on that.
Yeah, I
There are
wouldn't.
some good comments in here. I just want to make sure I read through them. Dufex has a good one here. Do throwback designs dilute original cards from younger, newer collectors, i.e., '90s finest refractor reprints, drowned dealer cases it shows, which I agree.
Mhm.
We do get inundated with those. Younger collectors don't appreciate OG and importance. I think it's a really good question.
Yeah.
Just to say a quick high level thing, I don't think that it goes back to kind of the conversation we had a little earlier. Look, I'm going to fully acknowledge, in the spirit of giving everybody the biases ahead of time, I, I take a more cynical approach to this. I don't give the audience a lot of credit. If we want to use a music analogy, you know what? They wouldn't know the difference between a properly tuned and a broken guitar. Like they don't know. They just hear sounds. They know there's sounds, and either it's pleasing or it isn't pleasing. There's no nuance. There's no subtlety. There's not really a lot of sophistication. All they're looking at, most of the people, if you're a collector and you've already figured out what you like and what you don't like, well, then yeah, you'll be able to filter everything, new and old, through that and make your judgment call based on that. But if you're the person who's in there relatively new to the game or newer to the game, there's an element of that, but you're looking at value. A lot of people do. They ask themselves the question like, "Oh, is this worth it?" And basically wait for everybody else to tell them what's good. They need tastemakers. They need somebody to be like, "This is the new hotness. This is what you
Hmm.
want." And if that's your mentality, then it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make a difference. Give them old or new designs. That's the only reason I gave Jason a little pushback on what he was talking about. I go, what's the point of hiring a design group or a company or going back to reinvest in old technology if the audience is happy to take a bowl of cereal and pretend that it's gourmet soup? They can't tell the difference anyway.
Yeah, I would take it this way though, then is that I do feel like there's always niches out there, and sometimes those niches do buy a lot of product. Think of Exquisite as a niche of the hobby that would pay a lot of money for those designs if they ever came back, right, with the right
Sure.
players.
But
And so
you've
I just
also
feel like
elevated the price. But you've also elevated the price point accordingly. So
true,
going back
true,
to covering your cost, right?
right. But I mean, I think if we had a true embossed refractor with the die cuts double sided, and they were numbered to 10, and they were in a high end product that they can't, because they've just done high end chrome products, right? They did gilded.
Mm-hmm.
What was the other set they did? Cosmic chrome, gilded. So they are doing these high end. Let's say they did something like that with Finest. They came up with a super high end Finest product, and you could get it in embossed refractor number to 10. I do think that there is enough market out there that product would sell out. And so I do feel like it's diluting a little bit, but it's also creating the opportunity to do that design. But again, I would want them to do it somewhat like, you know, have a retro version and sort of like that new version. In all honesty, I think Cosmic Chrome is the coolest thing they've done in a long time because they haven't followed any pattern. They haven't
Sure.
said, okay, we're going to take something that worked in 1995 and just redo it with some different looks and designs. They said we're going to do a whole new cosmic themed thing. And this year they even, I think, upped it even more with the planet cards, and it's his own thing. If you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. But if you're really into it, you can go really deep into collecting that set and different cards. And that's what I'm really talking about. I think Cosmic Chrome is the best case for a niche product that's priced pretty high, has really different levels of collectability, that has nothing to do with rookies and autographs. Because you look at what those cards are bringing in the secondary market for like the really cool planet cards and some of the other inserts that are case hits, none of them are autographed and a lot of them are just really cool looking cards. And that
Mm-hmm.
is what I think hopefully we have. I'm not saying every set has to be that way, but two or three of those sets every year would make a lot of difference in my opinion, because that's something that would make me go out and buy a box again, because I have quit buying a lot of new product because I just don't find a lot of fun opening the product. But I had a lot of fun with Cosmic last year, and I definitely want to open some more this year because it just had a fun appeal to me. And I think that is something that we're missing too, is it should be more fun. I think opening a box and not knowing what you're going to get has an element of fun to it.
I think that's fair. I think it's tricky though because obviously we do get the sell sheets and things, so they give away a
Mm-hmm.
lot of that information. But that's the reason why I can only because I have some insight into what Upper Deck does. Upper Deck does Easter eggs. They'll
Mm-hmm.
have stuff that is not on the sell sheet. that is meant to be a surprise in the vein of what you're talking about. They still
Yeah,
have to tell you the majority of what's going to happen so that
yeah,
people are not going in blind, because no one like people don't like surprises that way anymore, not en masse.
no,
They'll accept a
no.
little bit. If you give them an Easter egg, they'll take that. An Easter egg is fine. One or two Easter eggs, is kind of a bonus hit somewhere along the line or a surprise. That's okay. But if you try to completely sell them sight unseen on this product that you're asking $200, $300 a box for, people are going to look at you a little sideways and go, yeah, yeah, not so much.
Yeah, I think one of the funniest surprise cards or surprise things that ever happened was, I want to say, well, it's 2 years, and it came from both Allen and Ginter, right? One year, Allen and Ginter put mini cards, surprise mini cards. I believe it was the woods or metals in the as a special inside the box, hidden inside the flap. So you had to rip the flap open, and there would be a compartment where the
Yeah, it
card
was a
would.
rip card. Yeah, it was a rip card.
No, it was in the box,
Oh, okay.
part of the box, and people threw away their boxes, not knowing that there was a card hidden within the box.
So what you're saying
And
is Brad Pitt should have come
so
by and said, "What's in the box?"
exactly, you should have said to not throw your box away, guys. There might be something special inside the box. They didn't say that. The other one was the year they forgot all the wood cards. They didn't
Okay.
actually. They were on the checklist and never issued them. And then the very last year they had the code. It was never solved, and so they
Hmm.
just discontinued it because no one. It was so difficult to solve that no one ever solved it. So they just gave up. And so Allen and Ginter has his own little, and that's why I think Allen and Ginter is one of those fun products. I know Dufex talked about it a little bit.
Dufex mentioned Allen Ginter,
Yeah,
so I want to
Allen and
make sure I
Ginter is
acknowledge that. Yeah.
definitely where they had no rules. Like you could put Tony Hawk in the product, it's fine.
Yeah.
If you want to put metal cards in there, that's fine. If you want to put dinosaurs on the cards, that's fine. No
Yeah.
one cares because that product has no rules. Um, but a lot of products that people collect today, like Bowman and Bowman's Best and Bowman Chrome, if you do not follow the rules of that product, if you're tops, you will get people so mad at you. They will they will throw fits and scream and craze all kinds of heck if you don't do it the way that you've done it year over year. I mean, if they go from blues out of 150 to blues numbered out of 99, like the collector universe will cease to exist with all the anger from the collectors. And I think that's what creates that sort of you know um design, where you can't really change much. Maybe add colors, but other than that, nothing is really acceptable if you don't follow the pattern you've done year over year in those certain products.
It's the meme from Wayne's World. It's Garth.
Yeah.
We fear change.
um yeah, well, you know it is, the hobby is very needy. This comment from
Hmm.
Paul is actually pretty spot on. The hobby, and Carlos, you mentioned it a few times,
Hmm.
but the idea that you have to turn money in the hobby, where, you know, I think that did change in the '90s pretty dramatically.
Hmm.
Um, and then the 2000s solidified it, where the idea that the box had an ROI, that, if the box was $100, there better be $60 to $80 worth of cards in that box, a minimum, or else the box sucks, or the product isn't worth it.
All you got to do is
And
look at the Beckett. Look at the Beckett at the time period.
mhm,
What's one of the segments? One of the sections was where they would open up a box, and what
yeah,
would they do? They'd tell you what the breakdown was. We opened a box. This is what we pulled. Why
right.
would anyone care about that, Jason?
Oh yeah,
If we weren't thinking in their minds, wait, how much are you
oh
asking for
yeah,
this box? How much? That's the. It's being reflected in everything. You're being told what the breakdown is, and if you
mhm,
go, new product comes out, just punch it into YouTube. What do
oh
you
yeah,
get? You get somebody who opened a box, and you look at the view count on that. Sports card view counts are generally low, but if
mhm,
somebody with a decent following does a breakdown of a box or whatever, they get views. Why? Because people like surprises. They
mhm,
don't like surprises. They want to know with some idea, at least
oh yeah,
conceptually, what could come out
oh
of
yeah,
this box in theory.
yeah. And I understand it, because I mean I lived through that period too. I mean, look, when I first got out of college and was working, uh, buying a box and getting nothing out of it worth more than a couple dollars was very disappointing.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the amount of cost even then product was. I think it's a big myth. I think the big myth I think we should dispel about '90s and 2000s products was it was cheap. Um, some of that product was $6, $7 a pack, even in the 90s. You're talking
Yeah.
140, $150 a box in $1990,
Yeah.
compared to today. Back in that time period. And so, even Exquisite for the time period was super expensive compared to what else was on the market. Now you could look at it today and say like, well, Flawless is thousands of dollars, and there was nothing like that. But even Exquisite and those products when they first came out was considered kind of crazy for how expensive it was. I think we'd all agree that the value in those products was so high that we wouldn't bat an eye about the cost today. But even in those times, I remember people opening boxes of Exquisite in football trying to get the Reggie Bush cards back in the day. And there was a lot of people spending tons of money on those products trying to get the hottest player. And it just seemed crazy to me. And now I look at Flawless and other things like, who are these people that do this? Obviously, it has to be Drake and people with a lot of money, because that part of the hobby has definitely gotten, the high end has definitely gotten to the point where, you can't really, for most people, can't even participate, which is kind of disappointing to some extent, because I used to open Flawless. It used to be what, 1,200 a box. You could
I think it's something like that. Yeah, I
you
certainly
could
wasn't in the market for it, but I think, like, to your point, when I think back on the late '90s, going back to that time period, my favorite set, probably my favorite set from that era. Obviously, there were nicer sets and bigger hits and all that. My favorite set of the era was 97, 98 Black Diamond. Black Diamond,
yeah.
they did a couple different iterations of it. 96, 97 was the first one that they did in hockey. And it was a lot going on with it. They had the Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau rookies were the big pulls out of that. But you could get, a Gretzky triple diamond gold, and those were out of 50, and it was tough pull. And if you pulled one of those, that was a massive, massive hit, massive pull. 97, 98 was a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more streamlined in the way they did it, but it was one of my favorite ones just because of that. But at one point in time, there were a bunch of rookies in that set that took their turns being the key
Mm-hmm.
rookie. Alex Tanguay was a key rookie at one point. Vince LeCavier, Roberto Luongo, Maxim
Mm-hmm.
Afinogenov, which is a personal favorite of mine, which for a moment in time had some value. And I think he had the two Sedins were in that set. So there was all kinds of stuff going on with that set at one point in time,
Mm-hmm.
and they took turns leapfrogging each other. But then you went into the parallels, and then you went all the way into the only real insert you had was premium cut, die cut,
Mm-hmm.
with the multiple levels. But then they did premium cut, quad diamond, vertical, and horizontal. If you did the horizontal, they were 1 in 180 packs. If you did the vertical, they tiered them. They were
Mm-hmm.
randomly numbered. So you could have one that was 1 in 2,000 packs, but you had to be the right
Mm-hmm.
number, or certain
Right.
ones. But talking about complexity, unnecessary complexity, because you're sitting there going, so which
Sure.
one is it? Is this the difficult one, or is this the easy one? Like, which is it?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I love that set. But I never was able to open more than a couple packs at a time, because even at that point, I think it was like $4 a pack-ish, give or take,
Yeah.
somewhere in that
Mm-hmm.
range. But the thing is, even at $4 a pack, $100 a box was a lot of money in 1997, 1998.
Yeah.
Unless you were working full-time and doing all kinds of stuff, then yeah, I would love nothing more than to have opened a box or two of that back then.
Mm-hmm.
I might have opened an equivalent of a box over a course of months and months and months, a
Sure.
couple of packs at a time, but I never got a chance to sit down and just open a full box. But you want to buy that box today, it's worth way more than anything that you'll ever pull in it. There's
Yeah.
nothing you can pull in it that will make it remotely worth the value.
Right.
No way.
Right. I think that is the part that makes me kind of, it's interesting for me because I open a lot of baseball products on my channel, from the 90s. And it does surprise me the cost on baseball, versus what you could pull, um, especially compared to basketball and some hockey products I've looked at. It, in football is even crazier in terms of how cheap it is. But I opened up molten metal, and I
Right.
pulled 6 of the, I call them platinum portrait looking cards, the fusion cards. So, and 2 of them were numbered to 500.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about that, like, if you just hit the right player, Griffey, Jeter, Thomas, or a couple other Hall of Famers, because that, I think I said that box cost me around $300.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so many cards in that set worth more than $300. And in fact, inside of just the base fusion cards, there's cards that are worth more than that. And if you think about value today, like, there's very few products you could open today and say, I'm going to get 6 guaranteed chances of making my money back on this product. And that doesn't happen in basketball as often. That does not happen in some other sports where the box prices have gotten so high on some of the really key stuff. Baseball is still lagging a little bit in that 90s pantheon of pricing, and football is still way at the bottom of the cliff. You can buy a lot of nice football products unless it's got a key rookie in it, like 98, 2000, 2005. Those years are tough, but you can buy a 97 box, pull some awesome Barry Sanders cards, pretty cheap. Pretty darn cheap. 99, because that's really a dead year. You got Jake Plummer. 99, you can buy tons of 99 products, super dirt cheap, and looking for, still pull Favre, Manning, Sanders, tons of Hall of Fame, Reggie White. Pull a lot of Hall of Famers that are really all-time greats at a super cheap price. So I do feel like that's one thing I always say too about the 90s versus today, is that in baseball and football, they're so cheap. Like, I could open up products from the 90s still today, cheaper than a box of Bowman, cheaper than a box of Topps Finest, and probably have a better chance of pulling something worth more money than the current product that's being opened today, which is kind of
Well,
weird.
I think that was true for a while. Look, one of my favorite ones when I went to the expo for years. Um, there was a booth there who had wax. That's all they did was wax. Um, and it was fun going to the end cap of the booth because
Mm.
they would have cases of 97, 98 Donruss Preferred. That was the
Oh,
one at the
wow.
10. Cases. No,
Really?
cases upon case. I bought them
Jesus.
all day long, Jason's at 35 Canadian a box.
Oh my gosh.
35 Canadian. Like
You ever pull a metal?
you could have bought cases. Was
Did
that?
you ever pull a metal?
No. I never got lucky enough, but I pulled almost everything else that
Man.
you could pull out of it. The point was that they were $35 a tin. You know
Yeah,
why? Because
it's
no one liked them.
insane.
No one cared. It
Yeah,
didn't matter. And
you're
but
right.
that wasn't in the 90s. That was well
No,
into the
no, no.
2010s. Well
Yeah,
into
yeah.
the 2010s because by that point
100%.
the rookies and everything had long since gone. But here's the thing, you could still pull the golds, you could still pull different, you could pull
The
color
die
guards,
cuts.
you could pull the die cuts, you could
Yeah.
pull different, different players and different things in there. My other favorite one was the Donruss Priority. They had boxes of Donruss Priority that was like $25 a box. Well, you pull Stamps of Authority, which they had them in there. Stamps of Authority out of 100. They're beautiful looking cards. They're die cut. They're very shiny, very, very beautiful looking in terms of that. Full set in there. And yeah, it was like $25, $30 a box.
Yeah.
You could have as many as you wanted. Stack them up. Just cart them off by the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do agree that the prices are starting to go up. I mean, it amazes me though still when I look at like 98 Topps Chrome or 98 Finest, or you can pull like a Man Refractor or a Fortune 15, and the product sells for under $100 still sometimes. I think at some point those products will go like to $300-$400 a box, because your chance of pulling that card is hard, obviously, but it's not zero. But we're seeing that in other products where if there's a chance at a major card, your that box is kind of like three times what it probably should be worth. 97 Finest is another one. Like, since you can get embossed refractors, I'm just shocked they're not $1,000 a box, just because you might get the Griffey, right? You might get somebody cool. Chances are you're not going to get nothing. I mean, those are really tough hits, but it's not gotten there yet. I mean, you can still look for those products, and it amazes me when I go to shows and I find a box of 97, 98 Finest or 98 Topps Chrome for like $80, and you're like, okay, because they're all covered in dust. The guy's been carrying around with them for like 5 shows, but they don't. No one's really made the connection yet to the really cool cards that are in those boxes and the box prices at the secondary level yet. But it's coming. You can
Well,
see it. In the national
I guess it depends though, because as we were talking,
yeah,
I wanted to look it up. The last box of Donruss Priority, factory sealed hobby box, sold for
yeah,
135 American.
135. Yeah,
Yeah, I paid 20 Canadian.
yeah,
And
yeah. But I would even
they're
say
nice.
today though, like, that's still pretty cheap compared to the products that what the cost of modern product today is,
Oh,
and
compared to the
the
cost
fact
of
that
modern
you can
product, I
pull some
agree.
cool stuff.
But I think it was a different game though when I'm buying them for like $20 or $30 Canadian per,
Yeah,
and I can pull stamp of approvals. Like
yeah,
a Gretzky stamp of approval out of 100. holds water. Like you're talking plain
Mhm.
days Gretzky out of 100, beautiful looking set.
Yeah,
Those go. Those will move. You have no problem
those
moving
will
those.
do. Yeah. So now that you mentioned like some specific sets, with Mike Madonna, like,
Mm-hmm.
I know you've talked a little bit about that, you may be reaching towards your apex on your collecting of Madonna to some extent. Um,
Although ironically, I bought a nice one, a key piece that actually was an auction today, and I won it.
wow. Well, and I'll just give you an update.
Sure.
I picked up 4 Frank Thomas cards that are probably in the probably top 30 Frank Thomas insert cards of
Mm-hmm.
all time. A
Sure.
guy is liquidating his entire Thomas collection, and
Mm-hmm.
he has, everything. He has everything. The man refractors, established. He's got all the big time cards, and
Mm-hmm.
I picked up 4 really, really, really good cards. And maybe like I was so happy. I know how you felt. I mean, were you when you got that card? Were you pretty happy because it's a new Mike McDonald card? For you.
Well, I won it less than an hour before we started, so I was so I had set my snipe. Um, it was mixed. It was mixed feeling about it.
Mm.
I knew I'd have to pay way more than I wanted to,
Hmm.
and like I'll reveal, I have no problem sharing it. So there was a series of auctions that ended tonight, um, and it was the '99 2000 Upper Deck MVP Stanley Cup edition, which is one of those I still don't remember why that set even existed because you had '99 2000 MVP and then you had a Stanley Cup edition, so you had 2 MVP sets in the same year from Upper Deck. Thanks Upper Deck. I don't know why. But the thing with MVP is that because it was a baseline brand and a quote unquote cheap brand, uh, the superscripts were the problem with those late 90s and early 2000s ones. The superscript was the issue because you got this
Mm.
baseline product that you've got
Yes.
trillions of cases for, and the stupid superscripts are out of 25. So they're
25.
borderline
Yep.
impossible. Yeah, so they're borderline. So all the early 90s ones, I don't have the 98 99. That's one of the
Yeah.
few grails I got left. 99 2000, I don't have that superscript either. 99 2000 Stanley Cup edition, I don't have it. Until today.
Right.
Until
Awesome,
today.
man. That's so awesome. I mean, the reason why I say it's because I know that set from Griffey collecting and Thomas collecting. Um, I've actually bought a few other Hall of Famers. I picked up a Craig Biggio just because I felt like $40 for a card number 25 seems pretty cheap,
Mm-hmm.
of a Hall of Famer. But yeah, I picked up the gold Griffey earlier this year,
Mm-hmm.
which those are I think out of 100, and then the superscript I've never seen. I've never seen a Griffey superscript. I can't
That's the
imagine
tricky
what it's
part
up for.
for what should be a low end brand. Look, just to put it into context, I bought it for, I ended up winning it. The winning bid was
Mhm.
$166.39 US. So 225.05 Canadian is what it came out
Yeah.
to. PSA graded 9. The seller did it. I know who the seller is too. He's actually asked to come on the show before. So and
Okay.
maybe I'll bring him down the road. I should have told him I'll do it for discount. I knew he had the damn card, so I was like, all right. But he was going to put it in auction, so I had to win it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
Um, I didn't want to ever pay as much money for these stupid things as I had to here. It
Hmm.
annoys me that it is that. But the problem is, it's just too tough to pull. It just never. It doesn't come up.
Yeah.
So I've sat there waiting for years and years. Again, those are the first 3 superscripts. The first 3. I've got a few of the later ones in the later 2000s, but those are the first 3: 98 99, 99 2000, and 99 2000 Stanley Cup edition. So still at the end of the 90s. They come up once a decade, give or take. They
Yeah.
just don't appear. So it's not like, oh, but you
Yeah.
were willing to pay. It's like I would have been happy to pay for it if you'd made it available. So
Right.
I just needed somebody to make it available. Like, so in this case, they had it, and I was like, all right, I'm going to take this one down. It's going to be mine.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, how you feel like when you finally get a chance to own something. But just like when I bought in these 4 cards, I had mixed emotions too because um 2 years ago these Frank Thomas cards would have been half or a third of what I'm paying today.
Mm-hmm.
But I will tell you that I could not have purchased a single one of these cards if it said Griffey on it for the price
Mm-hmm.
I paid for all 4 Thomases.
Right.
So it is sort of a scale. It's like, okay, when I'm collecting Frank Thomas, I can pick up 4 or 5 of comparable cards for Thomas for 1 Griffey. And so now I'm to this like kind of like five for one. if I'm collecting Griffey and I find something I really like in Griffey that's super rare, say it's numbered to 100 or below, um, or I could buy 5 similar Frank Thomas cards. And
Mhm.
that's sort of the math that I'm going through a little bit in my head. I'm so far advanced on Griffey, and one of the things I was going to talk to you about is kind of like the idea of being a collector, right, or a super collector. Like I've always resisted the urge of calling myself a Griffey collector because I know what that entails, because I've been in those Griffey chats and those message boards. What it means to be a super collector for Griffey, you have to have about 10 or 15 of these key cards. I don't have them all yet. So I hate calling myself a Griffey collector or super collector because I know I'm missing some of the key ones. And so but I still am more advanced in my Griffey collection than I am in any other collector besides Clemente that
Okay.
currently collect. So I have to say, like, I'm a Griffey collector. Like, that's a big focus of my collection. But it does create this conflict in me where, even Jeter's super cheap compared to Griffey. That Griffey's gotten so far out there that does it start to be where I just know I can't get those 10 or 15 cards that kind of make you a super collector for Griffey. You have to have these 10 or 15 cards, and it's getting to a point where I'm not going to get some of those. Like they're just getting too expensive. I can't
Okay.
pay $6,000, $10,000, $15,000 for some of those cards.
Was there a question? Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, my question is this: is like with Madonna, like, do you
Yep.
feel the similar ways that? Because I know you're collecting some Favre and some other
Sure. Yeah.
players.
Yeah.
Have you gotten to the point where this guy's getting too far away from me? I need to maybe pivot to something a little cheaper.
Um. So yes and no. I think I think it's a situation where it doesn't have to be too expensive for me, but maybe this will be the way I'll answer it. If I was someone who felt the need to be like, oh, I need to be a completionist, or like, my condolences on being in a category where apparently there's a criteria for super collector. My opinion has always been the super collector is a nebulous concept. Like I don't even. I think if you think you're a super collector, fine. If somebody else has decided, if there's a committee, then I'm happy for them. But I'm like, that's stupid. That's really dumb.
Oh,
For,
go on the
for
Jordan collecting boards, and you'll find out that there's not only a committee, there's a chairman, a president, and a
yeah,
council of elders to tell you
yeah.
how bad your collection
Yeah,
is.
yeah. I reject the notion of the committee. Now, for Medano, over the years, I have found more Medano collectors who have been some of them who have been collecting since the '90s, like myself. So, kudos to them. They're kind of the OGs in the space, along with myself, which is awesome. Anybody who's doing it in the '90s, I'm very happy that is the case. That's awesome. If they're still doing it, even kudos, even better. But the bottom line is, if it was a checklist of like Medano cards that fall under that category, if you will, yeah, like I've checked most of those boxes. Some of
Mm-hmm.
them years ago, but some of them more recently. But the whole pandemic boom period was a boon for me hitting those things off the checkbox. The superscripts here are super tough. I know that. I know they're just super tough because obviously I've studied it, and also I've just had those save search things for so many years that it's like they just don't come up. And I know from some of those other collectors they just don't come up, or if they do, they lucked into one, and it's like, oh, that's
Mm-hmm.
awesome. But I've got so much stuff they can't even touch. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, if you try to pull that stunt on me, I'm like, all right, let me go grab some stuff I know you don't have.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
care, like at any price.
Yeah.
So the only way we're gonna get it is if I decide to sell it to you, and I'll make you pay for my house is what you want if you want to play that game.
Yeah.
But
No,
to kind of
I hear you.
let
I,
me,
I think for me,
I'll just finish the thought though. Let me
okay.
just finish the thought. All I was gonna say was, as pertains to that, part of it is that I just don't value it at that price. It's
Mm-hmm.
not that I can't. It's not even a situation that it's like I just don't understand. Even as a long time collector, I cannot get my head around it. So for me,
Mm-hmm.
the Favre thing is fun. Right now, I'm just having fun with it, and I'm not worried about building a super collection of Favre.
Right.
He's got so many more cards anyway. But for me, it's kind of cool finding all these neat autograph cards and some certain memorabilia cards. A lot of autographs mostly is really what I kind of shoot for with him. But yeah, it's fun for me. So having those other player collections and stuff is for entertainment. I still like chasing. I still like hunting. But
Yeah.
again, case in point with the superscript. I'm not actively really looking for anything in particular, Medano. The only card I think I have left that I would really want to add, if I had to add anything, is the 96-97 run for the cup. I
Yeah.
want that Black Diamond run for the cup. but the prices on those have gotten out of whack. They are out of hand.
Mhm.
And it makes no damn sense to me. I've got so many cards that are way tougher than out of 100, and it's stupid. And so that's one. And the only other ones are 98.99 SPX Finite. There's a Marquee Performer Spectrum that
Yeah.
is out of 25. And there is a Fantastic Finishers out of 98.99 Upper Deck, which is the Quantum 2, which is also out of 25. Those are the grail of grails, along with these superscripts because they're out of 25.
Right.
But a really
Right.
dumb one, Prime Choice Reserve. I want the stupid Prime Choice Reserve. I want the damn card. And someday, I suspect it'll appear somewhere. Somebody's
Right.
got it. But all the other ones that I could think of, I got them.
Yeah. No, I think that's, and again, I think that's the thing that for me when I look at you and your collection on McDonough is that you're very advanced. So I don't like calling like super collectors or there's people who have advanced collection because they've been doing it a long time
Mm-hmm.
and they've put the effort and time into it. Same way for Griffey and Jordan collectors, right? There's super advanced collectors. In the Griffey world, one of the first guys I met was Magic Papa. Check out any of his comments or his videos on Blowout. Um, he was the first guy that had so much stuff that I'd never seen before. Um, and when you look at how advanced those guys are, they built their collections when the cards were, a tiny fraction of what it is today, right? And they've all said like, well, if I had to go with today's pricing, I couldn't have, I wouldn't have the collection I have because it was just, a timing thing for them, right? But the advanced collecting side of it is that even in your own words there are certain cards that kind of like, yeah, these are the cards that are rare and hard to find, are truly what if I only had my collection down to 10 or 15 cards, it'd be these guys. And I think that's what most super collectors or advanced collectors have is they have their list, right? They have their kind of like the essence of this collecting, this player is down to these certain cards. And I think it's the same way for Griffey. I'm just saying like, yeah, the 97 in Bonds Refractor for Griffey is one of those cards. And the fact that the last one I saw the guy wanted $50,000 for makes me think I may not ever get that card. But I thought the same way about my 68 3D Clemente. So I don't think there's ever no hope. But I do feel like that is where you have to sort of draw the line in the sand where to you're saying like there's certain cards that, hey, if it's going to be this expensive, I just will have my collection without it. And I think that is the right approach. Like you have to eventually draw the line in the sand. Do you draw the line in the sand with your collecting on other rules? For example, I don't collect Griffey outside of his playing years unless it's just some kind of really cool card I want, but it's not part of my core collection. Do you have any rules like that with Madonna or Farbright yet?
So I do. I consider anything I decide to add part of. I guess if you wanted to find core collection, then sure, playing days is always the preference. If there's two similar things there, the tiebreaker is playing days. I always prefer playing days. But no, to me there are still cool cards that get made from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
I still am interested in them. I bought one the other day. They did a set that was they called it 2020-2021, but with Upper Deck's delays, it came out early this year.
Like 2 weeks
It
ago.
was Upper Deck SP Signature Legends. It was the
Mm-hmm.
Signature Legends or whatever. And I've made fun of that set. I've made fun of it to the end of the day because Steven Reinprecht is in the set is an autograph. I'm like, Legends is a strong word, my friends. Legends. I remember Steven Reinprecht. Legends is a strong word. Hal Gill is in that set. The Legends is a very strong word. Fan favorites is probably a more appropriate, but whatever.
Sure.
Yeah. But one thing they did that I thought was really neat, they have some really nice looking cards. There's some beautiful looking cards in that set. So I can make fun of it, but also acknowledge that there's some really nice looking cards in that set. One of the really nice looking cards in that set is called Evolve. And I have
Mm-hmm.
various versions of that, which I thought was cool. It was fun putting together a little mini rainbow of those cards.
Yeah.
But the other one that I think is really cool is that they did an all-time Future Watch. So what they did
Okay.
is they took legends. Now for that set, you've got legitimate legends. You've got the actual Hall of Famers and like really top tier players. So Medano's in that checklist, and they've got a what if Medano had been around? So he's in his Minnesota North Star gear. What if
Mm-hmm.
Medano had been around in the era of the autographed Future Watch? So
Yeah.
you can get an autographed Future Watch Medano in a North Stars jersey, numbered to 99, hand signed auto.
Yeah.
hard signed auto. And
Yeah.
I just picked that up the other day from ComC, literally this weekend. So, to me, that's a really cool card. Do I
Yeah.
need it? No, I don't need it. But is it a really cool card that I'd like to
Yeah.
have? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. For me with Griffey, the only cards I really consider that, for me is if it's something that is you mentioned cool design, like they tops did a Japanese release where they had these apple blossom cherry blossom tree inserts.
Sure.
I just thought they were really cool looking parallels and designs, so I picked up a Griffey of that. But the Dynasty autos, the patch autos from Dynasty,
Hmm.
they're just really nice cards. So
Yep.
I would like to have a few Griffies there. And then the only really Griffey I'm chasing that's modern would be combo autos with players I like. For example, Griffey does have a Hank Aaron, King Griffey Jr., dual auto,
Hmm.
Mike Trout Griffey, Ichiro Griffey, something that was comboed with a modern player, Acuna Griffey, something like that. I would find cool. Otani Griffey, that would be a card I would put into my collection that was
Sure.
modern.
Hmm.
But in general, yeah, because like you said, you have to have some constraints or else it creates sort of anxiety, because if everything's on the table, then it becomes kind of like compartmentalism in your brain becomes difficult when you're collecting and you're trying to say like, what should I be looking for today? It's like, well, if it's everything that's ever been created for a player like Griffey and even Madonna and Farb, it's like that's just such a big universe that's out there. But I definitely look for certain traits and qualities of modern cards, and some of the throwbacks are cool. They did a 91 Stadium Club auto. I thought that was a
Hmm.
really cool card because I always like that the picture on the 91 Stadium Club. To have an on card auto on that card as a throwback was pretty cool, and I think those are the kind of cards that kind of draw me in a little bit. Um, and again, that's manufactured rarity, playing on my nostalgia built in, but it works. It definitely works.
Yeah, but I'll give you an example, kind of playing off what you're talking about. So, perfect example. I talked about that superscript card that I won, and just knowing how difficult those superscripts cards are, and how long I've been, I've had that save search on for such a long time. Like and any of those first three superscripts, if you
Mm,
tell me to pick, prioritize something, I'm going to focus on those first three
yeah,
superscripts because they're the first three.
but
So,
which one?
98, 99, 99 2000, and
Right.
99 2000, Stanley Cup edition.
But do you have one of those three that you would value even more than like the? How would you rank them?
Well, always the first one's the best
First one's the
to me
first one. Okay.
because the first one's the best. Mainly
Yeah.
because I actually opened a fair bit of that product and I remember it extremely well. It was a beautiful product. It was actually really nice. That was the same year they did the sorry, no, it was UD Choice. That for whatever reason, that 98 99 year, and I don't remember what the story was. I got to see if I can figure it out. Maybe I'll look into it. 98 99, they released Upper Deck MVP. That was the first
Yep.
year of MVP. And they also did UD Choice that same year. So it was like two entry level brands the same year.
Huh.
98 99.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, they did both. The
Hmm.
first year of MVP and they did UD Choice. UD Choice is where you get your StarQuest Golds, the infamous
Right.
StarQuest Golds,
Yep.
and also the Prime Choice Reserve. Funny enough, these two low end brands have some of the cards that are left that I still
Hmm.
need. The Prime Choice
Right.
Reserve, the StarQuest Gold I've had it for years, and those superscripts. That have been the bane of my existence for the longest time. But the 9899 is the one that I would choose.
Yeah.
This one though is obviously and honestly would go in order of the release.
Yeah.
9899 number 1, 99 2000 number 2, Stanley Cup edition number 3. So I've
Yeah.
got number 3. Scratch it off the list.
Right. Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying completely, because that happens, with me. When I look at, especially with the refractors with Griffey, the thing that's funny with the refractors, a lot of them aren't numbered. So you
Hmm.
take 99 finest numbered out of 100, golds. You take the 99 Bowman's best, 100 for atomics, 400 for refractors. They did that in 98 as well. So there's years where there's numbering, years where there's not numbering, but it always goes back to me. It's like, the best Topps Chrome refractor is 96 first year.
Hmm.
The
Yep.
best finest refractor is 93 first year. My favorite Bowman's best refractor is, I like the 99, but I will say the 98 design is probably the best design. I just have a lot of nostalgia for 99. but it's just very rarely do you not find the first year something was made to be sort of the not only the best design, but the card that you want the most. Upper Deck Legend autos are not Legend, the retro autos. The first year for the retro Griffey, it's
Mhm.
10 times better than the second year. So it's like it's just weird how that always works out, where the design or just there's something cooler about that first year, and then every year afterwards is sort of like a little bit of a lesser version of the first year. It seems like it always works that way, but some years and some sets, like I say with Bowman's Best, the set got better designed until it dropped off the cliff in 2000, when they just said, all those refractors that you loved in 98, 99, we're just not going to have them anymore. No more refractors for a
I'll be
set.
honest. I actually like '94. To be honest, I like '94 Bowman's best. To me, I liked it in
Yeah.
baseball. I like the color scheme. To be honest, I enjoyed the color scheme and the way it looked. But one thing I'll add. So the point that I was making though about that specific one
Yeah.
was in the same seller in the same auction, because he does a whole bunch of auctions. He actually is bulk seller. He'll sell a lot of auctions that'll end very similar to each other. So the superscript became the priority because I will go, that's one of the key pieces that I've got left. Out of what little list is left, that's one of the few ones that I need. But in the very same vein, in the very same auction ending tonight, he had a 0809 one of one from one of the other sets, a
Mm.
one of one, a very nice card. But here's the thing, uh, I'm going after the superscript. The one of one actually sold for less than the superscript. So I actually
Wow.
could have gotten the one of one cheaper. And it was a
Wow.
plain days one of one. It wasn't, but the thing is, I was like, yeah, I've got one of ones. I want that stupid superscript because that thing
Yeah.
I've been. So, but it's like, look,
Yeah.
if the guy who bought the one of one gets bored, I'll offer him something later. I want the stupid superscript. It's mine.
Yeah. It's just funny, like you mentioned that, because in that Thomas auction, there was a lot of really nice cards, right? There was platinum medallions of Thomas, multiple years, including the 98, which is considered by far to be the best designed 90 platinum medallion from Ultra. So he had every subset too, the checklist,
Mhm.
all the different subsets in the platinum medallion. So like some years there's like four
Mhm.
for the player, and I ignored them all. And I'm looking at the 99 Bowman's Best Atomic because I've got the Griffey, and I'm like, well, this will be my pair. I'll have both the Griffey and the Thomas, and it just shows you, like, as a collector, you're going to focus on the cards you love and the ones that really speak to you,
Mhm.
versus like, yeah, should I have just put all my money into that 98 Platinum because in this grand scheme of thing, that's the most popular card he had that was for sale, and that would have probably, held the value or gone up in value the most, probably. But I sure as heck love that 99 Bowman's Best Atomic, and I thought that card was cool as heck, and that's the one I went after. Um, and that's just, I think that's, as a collector, that you're going to do that. You're going to make irrational decisions, even as yourself, knowing that, well, I probably should buy this other card. It's probably going to be more, higher in value some other day, but I really want this card because it's something I really love.
Yeah, but that's why I gave that example though. Like same auction, same
Mm-hmm.
seller, ending on the same night. I have a certain amount of budget. I had to control. I had to make sure I have decisions that I needed to make. So so to be clear, Jason, for the amount of money that I paid for the superscript that I bought, I could have bought the one on one instead and saved a couple
Oh
bucks.
yeah,
I had the option. I
yeah,
could have one or the other. And I didn't even hesitate. I went straight for aggressively bidding on the super because that's
yeah.
the one I wanted to win.
But that, I mean, to me, that's perfectly understandable as a collector. That's how collectors think and operate. I mean, when I made my trade for my 68 3D Clemente, in the comments was tons of people saying like, why would you give up a Babe Ruth for a Clemente? Why would you trade those cards for that card? And it's just, that's the card I want. I'm a collector. That's what speaks to me as someone who wants to build a collection. I value that much more than any of those other cards. Um,
Sure.
and so I like this comment from US Sports Cards about the 90s insert hype.
Mhm.
And I do like the word you use, hype, because just like any time in the hobby history, there's cycles, right? And right now, definitely 90s inserts are on this cycle. Baseball is getting popular. Basketball took off a lot of years ago. Basketball has already gone through multiple cycles of hot and cold, with Jordan inserts and Kobe inserts and that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, the 90s cards are, in that cycle, and I don't know if they're going to stay this hot. I don't know if it's a good investment or not. I will say this is that they're a lot of fun. And
Hmm?
they definitely for me create a lot of nostalgia because that's, one of the eras I collected heavily in. But to me, at least the one that you can hang your hat on for a lot of those cards is that either A, design wise and printing technology wise, they're some of the most unique cards probably ever made. And
Hmm.
B, some of them probably won't ever be done again because they're too expensive or the technology's lost. So you have something built in there in terms of collectability, but I don't think that it's sustainable for some of these cards to be this expensive. And we're already seeing the price drop on some sets, even Griffey. Some cards have gone way down.
I think it got overcooked. I honestly think the answer to that is that no. Will it sustain? No, because I think what's going to happen is the people that really want one are going to buy in. I'm already seeing, so kind of in the example that we talked about earlier tonight, um, for some of the Medano collectors that I know, some of them were going super aggressive, super ham, which I understood. During the pandemic period, I went super aggressive for certain cards that I really wanted. I got the full complement of the mirror golds, the totally certified from Pinnacle, the platinum gold and the mirror gold, platinum
Mm-hmm.
gold, and all that stuff. Got them, got them,
Wow.
and got them. Like I said, if I took like the top 100, so like this is how extreme that era was. And while everybody was complaining about rising prices and everything, I agreed, I understood, but I sat there and like it put people out of the woodwork to put the stuff. If I had a list of top 100 bananas that were still on my checklist that I needed, I probably checked off 85 of them or 90
Mm.
of them. Like it's like the vast majority of them
Yeah.
scratch, 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 scratch. And I was like, did I want to be buying that much stuff in such a short? No, I didn't. But I had mail days every week, Jason. Every week there were mail days. Stuff was coming in by the bucketful. But the thing is this: now I get to sit back because I've already got them off the checklist.
Mm.
So now I get to kind of chill and sit back and really be like strategic and like snipe what I really want to snipe and just wait. But the point is this: while I was doing that, some of these other long-term banana collectors were sitting there like aggressively chasing other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them went off on a chasing of the shields,
Yeah.
and the shields are obviously great cards. They're super premium cards. I know where a good chunk of the Medano shields are. I know who's got them. But the last one that sold, I want to say sold for almost $2,500 or $3,000, and I'm just sitting there
Wow.
going like, no, I'm out. I can't do it. Nope.
Yeah.
I have a shield, Jason. I paid $400 for it.
Yeah. No,
Like
that's
I'm sorry, I can't do it. I
yeah.
refuse. I can't do it.
But I mean, that's a good example of like the other Griffey collectors I talked to is that, yeah, I know collectors that have the 97 embossed refractor and they paid $300 for it, right? The last one I saw at a card show was $50,000. It's just, there's collectors that have those cards because they were smart enough or just that's who they collected at the time. They knew which cards were rare and they went and got them. I think that is them being, smart and collecting in a way that, I kind of always envied is that, buying the cards that are probably truly rare. Um, instead of me back in the day, I look at the 90s as like, or the 2000s and 2010s as like where I spent way too much time buying modern pirate cards and rookie cards. I bought a lot of vintage cards too, so I guess that offsets a little bit. But I could have been buying a lot of stuff that I would be much happier with today. But that's how it always is, right? No one goes through this hobby unscathed when you start collecting and buying stuff. Um, so the 98, 99 refractor set, yeah, atomic refractor. I think Paul, I think this is a very common thing with player collectors and I call we had a discussion a little bit before we got on about the rationality or the irrationality of the hobby is that if you don't like what the card looks like and doesn't speak to you, it doesn't matter the value. As a
Mm-hmm.
collector of a card, it doesn't matter. If you don't want the card, it doesn't, it won't make you want to go buy it. I made a video about cards I hate to collect. And a lot of times I said either I didn't like the design or the card has been faked or altered too much for me to have confidence. A good example for me is 91 Desert Shield cards. They're so easy to fake and so many have gotten through grading companies that I just won't pay a lot of money for one
Mm-hmm.
because I just know that they're a card that has been altered so much. The same way for you talking about, I just don't like the design. that's fine. I think that's the thing is like if you don't like design, you don't have to collect it. That's the one big power we have as collectors is you don't have to buy everything. You can just say no. And like that card doesn't appeal to me, I'm not going to buy it. And that doesn't mean I lose my collector credential card, even though I just talked about there are guys out there keeping tabs. But you can control your own collection. And I think that's one of the big superpowers we do have is we can say I'm not going to buy that card and I'll just buy something else. There's always
That's
another
the,
card
the
to buy.
that's the reason why, though, I made the point where I said that I would have gotten bored if I had just dedicated myself to just collecting Medano the entire time. If
Yeah.
I didn't have some other projects. So the thing with Farv is that there's so much stuff available, so many possibilities, so many directions I could go,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not all expensive. Some of them are very affordable. I got one of the '97 Hot Hands. I got that one that'll be
Yeah, that's a
coming in a
cool
future.
card.
That's the point though, and I think I paid like $25 for it. Like it wasn't
Right.
crazy, and I was like, it's a cool card. It's $25. Great, sounds awesome.
Mm-hmm.
'90s Favre, right where he's in the middle of his apex doing his thing. Like sounds great to me. Um, but I have that option. I have that luxury of being able to go into the back catalog, and there's plenty of stuff out there that I can chase, and it could be a good time. But if I had dedicated myself and just said, all right, all my collecting dollars are going to go to getting the greatest Medano collecting that has ever existed. Yes, I had the opportunity. I was collecting in the '90s when the stuff first came out.
Oh yeah.
It would have been a heck of a lot easier to get the Z Gold from '97, '98 Zenith if I had bought it in '97, '98 when no one cared.
Hundred
That would have been the
percent.
time.
Oh yeah, 100%. But it goes down. I look at my collection and one thing I was going to ask you because I spent all day, not all day, but hours a day sorting my collection, putting things together in boxes, and I'm at a place personally collecting wise where I'm getting happier with my collection as I thin out stuff and weed things out a little bit.
Mhm.
Sell things through, check out my cards, and just do some things I should have done a long time ago.
Okay.
But there is a thing with, you know, I have this memory of things I could have bought, should have bought, would have bought, and I would have been much better off because I'm looking at a box of cards going like, I can't believe I bought these instead of buying something that would have made my overall collection better. And I'm getting more at peace with it, but it's still hard to when I pull out a box of cards, I'm like, man, I spent way too much money on this stuff and I don't want it anymore. And I probably shouldn't have wanted it back then.
Hmm.
Do you ever have times when you go through your own collection where you're just like, man, I wish I would have spent more time, like you said, in the '90s, just getting the cards I really wanted versus going off on these kind of side missions here.
Well, to be honest, like probably 80% of the volume. Yes. The main PCs have occupied over the years. It's gotten a lot better. And thank you, Damiard. Appreciate you. But the thing is that one of the things I won't say it's a side diversion because I do think it's a genre that I think is a lot of fun. Is I do also collect vintage. So we talk about
Mm-hmm.
that. We've talked about that in the past. But the thing is, there's a lot of the sets that I just don't care for. So to be honest, and this would be a controversial take for some folks, like 80% of the vintage I have, I was a waste of my time. I should never have
Mm-hmm.
even bothered because I don't really like the set. I had in the back of my mind this project that I was going to build a set run, but it's like
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like most of them. Now, 53 Bowman Color is a project that I'm working on right now. I love that set. I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful set. And as I chip away at it, I think that's going to be phenomenal when it's done. Especially since I'm being very picky about the pieces I'm adding. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. Then down the road, I want to do the 53 top set. I have already a good start on. I have the mantle. I have some of the key pieces. But
Yeah.
there's a few other big cards that I still need to add. But that is to me is one of the aesthetically most beautiful sets as well.
Yeah.
So like that would be
100%.
a set that I would be very proud to own the completed set for. But after that, there's only a handful of things left, and I can foresee that if I collect long enough here, there's a light at the end of the tunnel where I'm just going to give up on vintage and be done with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would rather collect some of the other. I would rather hunt down what's left of that Medano checklist. What's left of it? Obviously, there's more stuff. There's more stuff coming out all the time. I'll still get stuff, but honestly, I'm getting wrestling cards because frankly, that's fun for me. I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I've got 10,000 Favre cards out there if that's what I want to collect. Like, there's so
100%.
much. There's plenty. So I don't ever need to be done, but there's certain categories where it's like, yeah, when I finish I've got my roadmap of my next couple of vintage sets projects that I'm working on. When that roadmap is done, I'm done. I'm not going to
Yeah.
start another set. There's no point. I'm just not
Yeah. No,
interested.
I think that is, for me, I have to, the struggle I have is I start things and just let them dangle for forever, right? Never complete anything, just let the set kind of fade off into existence, into memory. A good example of that is I was a big Matt Holiday collector because, I'm from Oklahoma and I was collecting players who played in Oklahoma, who grew up in Oklahoma.
Okay.
And so Matt Holiday won MVP, and I was very excited about him. But then when he kind of retired, I just kind of quit collecting him. And then I found this giant box of Matt Holiday cards, and they weren't just like, just base cards or whatever. I mean, these were like hardcore Matt Holiday cards, like super fractors,
Okay.
like his Bowman Chrome Gold rookie card, numbered out of 25 refractor. These were pretty hardcore, and I finally traded some to a big Colorado Rockies holiday collector, and got some 90s cards. I did a video on it, but it's kind of like that made me super happy because I took something that I'm looking at it in my, as I'm seeing my collection, in boxes, and this box saying Matt Holiday. I'm like, what am I ever going to do with that?
Mm-hmm.
And to turn it into some cards I really like and enjoy, that made me, feel like, man, maybe I can get rid of some of this stuff and get some stuff I like better. It's not just a pipe dream, because in the back of my head, I'm like, no one likes Matt Holiday. No one collects Matt Holiday. These cards are going to be a boat anchor for the rest of my life. And then all of a sudden, some guy's like, I love Matt Holiday. I'll trade you some cards over here, including a cool Griffey card that you don't have. I'm like, wow, I didn't realize that was even an option. It was like, I have options here. I can actually get rid of some of these cards because some other people might like them better. And it's just weird because in my head, I'm just like, I'm just stuck with these cards. I don't have any. I have no options. I can throw them on eBay maybe, but that's eBay is sort of the last resort for me on getting rid of cards, because it's just such a hassle.
I agree.
I'm just not a big fan of selling on eBay. Check out my cards. To me, I like it a little bit better because it's just easier. But getting cards there and getting them listed, it still takes a process. But now, that made me feel so much better as a collector, to think that I can get out of these cards somehow and move into stuff I really like. And that's really energized me a little bit to kind of organize. That's why I'm organizing now, to try to get things put into boxes so I can either sell them, move them to different places, or trade them to people. And I think that's going to be a phase I'm going to be in for a while, is kind of getting rid of the stuff I don't want, and really just getting the stuff I really do want, and downsizing, because it's hard not to become a hoarder when you collect too much stuff.
Well, that's the decision I made some time ago. I don't want. There are people who want a collection where they say, "Oh, I've got a million cards. I don't want that. I got
Oh
100,000
God,
cards. Nope, not interested. Not
it makes
remotely
me
interested in
so.
service."
Just to say that out loud, you have a million cards, makes me want to crawl under the table and hide.
Yeah. So it's
Because
one of those things where like the
you know,
volume doesn't matter to me. That's why I say like, look, I'm never going to. Maybe this would be the philosophical way I would present this.
mhm.
I'm never going to regret anything I've done, because every decision I made was like it seemed like a good idea at the time. And that sounds like a cop out, but it's also like, well, I had to do it in order to figure out that it wasn't a good idea. So once I got a chance to do it, like actually
That's my whole
that wasn't a
college
good idea.
career.
Yeah, that actually was a terrible idea. That one you could have done it maybe a little differently, but that's okay, because then okay, so now I get it. Yeah, I like to. I had a wandering eye and ventured off, but here's the thing: I did have my pillars, and what became clear over time is that I had certain pillars that were consistent, that were there the whole time, and I kept chipping away at it, and I kept doing my thing over time. Of course, if I had put a direct focus on it, yeah, those collections would be even further. I would already be done my vintage roadmap. If I had focused a certain amount of the budget to that vintage roadmap back in the day, I would have put together those sets for a song compared to what they go for these days to get some decent copies. And I'd have some awesome looking sets. And yeah, I'd be done already.
Yep.
I'd have already retired from vintage by now already, which would be fine. That's perfectly fine. But that's okay. I learned my lesson. And it's not even a bad lesson. It's like, no, that's fine. So there's some cards here that I got to figure out what I'm going to do with, and I'll figure it out. The problem is that I'm really lazy when it comes to sorting. I am the worst. That's why I say volume is not a good idea. Volume is a terrible idea, because if you hate
Oh yeah.
sorting, volume sucks. Volume's terrible.
Yeah. Well, I tell you one thing that, you know, trying to keep it down to what you really love. Um, I look at things. I'm like, I would really like to start collecting Reggie White. I really think he's super undervalued, and maybe I'm like looking at Reggie White cards. And I'm like, what do you do, man? You just started a Barry Sanders collection 2 years ago. Now you're into Reggie White. Sometimes I kind of like, that's the wandering. Like, you get where you think, oh, maybe that's a good idea, and then it takes over a little bit of your collecting focus, and then you're like, I should have probably been buying some of those other cards I needed for my other collections, but I didn't. And I think that is the headspace that sometimes, as a collector, you get into. And I don't, I hate to say focus, because I don't think collectors ever can be 100% focused, because I've seen the guys that were that. I like, I only collect one thing and that's all I collect. I've seen it with sets, with players, and I like that focus. But in terms of, like, I think that's great for them. It's just not
I'd be bored.
how I
I'd be
I would be
bored.
bored too. And I would also probably quit collecting at some point, because it would just, not only be boring, but it also would, probably be over at some point, because at some point you would get too much of one thing and just be kind of like, it'd be so repetitive that you would say, I have enough. I don't need more of this one thing, and I'll probably just not collect any more cards. And um, with Clemente, that's sort of, there was a thing when I had his base set finally for the first time in my life, where I'm like, I don't have to buy Clemente cards anymore, or search for him anymore, or look at shows for his cards anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of sad. I'm like, oh, this is like a part of my life that's gone away. But then I quickly realized there's a whole bunch of other Clemente cards I don't have.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just like, there was this moment in time where I'm like, what am I going to do now? Like, this was kind of like my whole collecting focus for 20, 30 years of my life.
Yeah.
I think that is, one of those things that I call it almost like self-sabotaging. Like, you don't ever want to finish, because once you finish, what are you going to do from there? I think,
Well, I
you
think that's
start a
where
new
being
collection.
nebulous is helpful. The Brett Favre collection is one of my favorite collections, if for no other reason. The Medano collection for a long time was completionist. It was up
Yeah,
until a certain point that it couldn't be. Once the one
right.
of ones really became prevalent, then we had to. Then it became all right. Let me try. Of of course, in a perfect world, I would love to have the complete playing days run. And by the way, when I do my checklist, I automatically remove one of ones. I don't even count them as part of my checklist because, well, you either got it or you don't. Like, there's no point. It's silly. It's redundant to even bother with that. But there's a certain segment of the checklist that I think is realistic. There's a
Yeah.
certain segment of it, and if you want to niche it down even further, like if I've broken up the checklist into components, into pieces,
Hmm.
and the '90s is possible. The '90s is I could finish Medano played the entire decade, right? His rookie card was 1990
Yeah,
91,
1990. Yeah.
and he played all the way through. So I could 100% complete the '90s if the right cards came up at the right
Yeah.
time. So that is plausible. And horrifically, I am so ridiculously close. It's hilarious
Right.
comparatively to the amount of cards in the time period. Uh, so that there is there's a universe down the road where I could actually, because I think I'm under 100 cards left for the
Yeah,
decade.
that's pretty crazy to think
Yeah,
that.
so it's like, so it is possible. Is it something that I expect today or tomorrow? No. Um, but it is possible. There is a universe in which that could happen. We'll see. I'm
Would you
not too worried
feel,
about it.
if you accomplish that? Would you feel like, how do you think you'd feel after you got all the '90s cards of Madonna?
Very similar to the way I feel right now, because the ones that are left are so tough that they don't come up. So that's why I gave that example of the all time future watch. For me, the Medano collection, if the Medano collection doesn't move ever again, great. Well, but obviously I was able to get that superscript, so
Sure.
so it is possible for things to still. I guess I'm a lot more appreciative of when I am able to find something that fits, because
Yeah.
that's awesome. But I'm not expecting it. In this case, I saw that one coming because I knew the seller and I knew they had it. So I was just waiting for them to put it up for auction. But most of the time, I don't. I just sit back and wait, and just to see if anything happens. But what's going to happen at a certain point is that, yeah, for a certain point, the list will just be pretty static. Um, but what'll happen at that point is it'll be anything I add will be, is this cool? It'll be like that Future Watch thing, because like I said, I have friends over at Upper Deck, and sometimes they give me a little heads up on new products, and they'll show me a Medano that's in the set, and I
Yeah.
go, well, you better make it cool, otherwise I don't care. With due
Right.
respect, with due respect, if it is not cool, I told them it better be cool. You show me something that's cool, I'm interested. You just
Right.
make a card for the sake of making a card, whatever.
Well, yeah, I think it's interesting that, you know, that as you get closer, more advanced in your collecting too, is that certain cards definitely mean a lot more. And I think that is, so when you get them, I mean, I remember when I got my mirror, the first mirror card I had a Griffey and from 96. And
Mm-hmm.
it was almost like, surreal because that's definitely one of those cards where I never thought I would ever get any of those cards. Now it's like after getting some other really harder to get Griffey cards, it's like you kind of feel like, yeah, okay, I can actually get some of these cards and own them, and now I'm like, okay, well that's, I don't know if it's less special, but definitely that first mirror card I got a Griffey made me like really feel like, okay, some of this stuff's possible. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's, there is some ability to get some of these cards, because I think you made a good point about the availability, because in reality, to your point, it's not really money that prevents you from collecting. It's like the cards ever showing up,
Mm-hmm.
having the ability to find the cards. And you're right, during the pandemic was the best time to find anything, because pretty much people said, look, this is my chance to cash in. And if I can turn this, just like I just talked about Matt Holiday, if I can turn this Matt Holiday card that's I've been sitting here for 10 years on, into some money that I can now go buy something else, that's better for me. And to the Matt Holiday guy, he's like, where the hell is that Superfractor been? I've been looking for that card for 10 years, and finally one shows up, right? It's kind of like on both ends, both people are happy. But unless there was a financial incentive to do that, and that's what the pandemic brought up, was neither party was going to have the opportunity. And I do think that hopefully with this 90s boom, we start seeing more and more cards come up. And the more availability that does come up, prices will go down. You know,
I think there'll be an element of that, but
there will be an element of, because some of these cards aren't one of ones.
for sure,
We
yeah.
look at like these refractors that Topps made, they're not numbered, the majority of them. And some of them probably have thousands that were made. Even the gold finest refractors from 97 and 96, they probably had more than 400 or 500 made. So it's not like you won't see them come up for sale. If they reach a certain price point, they'll come up for sale a lot. You'll see them
Yeah,
listed every week,
for sure.
if they're worth a certain amount of money.
Now, what's funny though, and in the same vein, kind of you got me down the train of thinking of thought about that. In the same vein of what you're talking about, I was going to say like the appreciation for when you are able to find something that maybe even is not expected. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's there in theory, but you don't expect it. Um, I went to my Instagram because I knew I had a picture of it. I wanted to make sure I refreshed my memory when it was. So it's here 41 weeks ago. 41 weeks ago is when I posted the
Okay.
picture. So what happened was a buddy of mine was talking to me, and he has access to a lot of collections, and they buy a lot of collections.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I guess it's good to know people or to have friends who are keeping an eye
Sure.
out and things like that. Again,
You get
certain
network,
things
man.
you're just not expecting. Yeah, networking for sure. But certain things you're not expecting. But going back to kind of what we talked about, like I said, in the 90s, I was under 100 cards left. So I've got the majority of what's out there. What's left over is either one of ones, in which I either have it or I don't, or stuff that's like generally very obscure or really tough to come by. So he says, I got something you don't have. Which, them's fighting words. That's a challenge, especially when it comes to certain segments of the checklist I'm more well covered than others. But he goes, no, I'm confident you don't have this one. So then he shows it to me, and as soon as he shows it to me, I'm like, I wasn't even sure the damn thing even existed. I wasn't like it was in the checklist. In theory, it exists. So I'll tell you what it is. It's so Pacific did a lot of stuff, especially in the late 90s.
Definitely did a
One of the
lot of
things
stuff for sure.
they did, yeah. But one of the ones they did was 99, 2000, Pacific Center Ice Proofs. So it was the
Okay.
proofs. So there was these little acetate cards, and they're
Okay.
all numbered to 10. But the thing is, they're impossible.
Mm-hmm.
They like I had not even seen a picture of one. Not a picture, not a, like it's the only place that confirmed its existence was its existence on a checklist.
Wow.
It was like as far as I'm concerned, it's a ghost. It
Right.
doesn't exist. Until he held it up in front of me. And I was like, it was in Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, Canada, of all places, in a collection buried for 20 years.
Wow.
And he had it. And then he sent it to me. One of my buddies, who is a big time Saka collector, like hardcore. At one point, he had like almost all the checklists of what was possible. His response to that post was, 22 years later, I still haven't found a Saka.
Wow.
And this dude had the resources. He's got the connections. He sets up as
Sure.
a dealer. So like he literally could have feelers put out for anybody. If anybody sees the damn card in Saudi Arabia, he'd get a text message or something. And 22 years later, he still doesn't have the Saka, which tells you how difficult it is. That card is just off screen over here.
Yeah. And that's the thing about it too, is as player collectors, and just, you know, there are certain cards in your collection that people wouldn't think as being super rare or cool, because we talked about design earlier being so important, but sometimes it's just that rarity. Like a card was in an unpopular set, but it was really rare and no one opened the product, so that card just doesn't exist. And I think that happened at Pacific sometimes. Like the sets weren't that popular, or those cards weren't saved because they weren't tops or whatever, and then they just kind of go away and you never see those cards. And I think that's going to be one of those things that is going to evolve in the hobby. Is there is going to be these kind of like really hard to get cards that people are going to realize for certain players. From I think Pacific's a great example of a manufacturer who had so much stuff going on in their sets. It's hard to know what's really rare, and like you have to really do some research to figure it out. That's a great example of a card that if you probably showed to someone, they'd be like, okay, it's a card. What's so special about it? And then it's like, oh, well, to my knowledge, there's like only a handful of these cards have ever been found and in the wild. And that makes it so special. It's like one of the cards I did trade to this guy was an MVP promotion Matt Holiday. And to my knowledge, it's the only one that's ever been found. I think there's maybe two on the pop report, maybe, but it's the first one that I've ever seen for the rookies in that set. They weren't supposed to have been issued with rookies. They were only supposed to have been issued with vets. And Topps made mistakes and did some rookies. So the Matt Holiday rookie has the MVP promotion back. And one of the cards I got in return in this deal was the Griffey promotion. So think about the Griffey, right? That card would have been popular. There have been a lot of people in 1999 looking for the Griffey MVP promotion card because you could win stuff with it. There's 3 on the pop report. So like that set super rare. But if you talk to people today, oh, I had the 1999 MVP promotion Griffey card from Topps, they would be like, okay, that card doesn't mean nothing to me, because that doesn't, even to a collector, they're like, what's so special about the MVP promotion card? Well, they're incredibly rare and hard to find, and they're a parallel that most people don't know about. And that's just one of those things where I think as the hobby gets a little more sophisticated, maybe those cards get more expensive and popular, or maybe not. You know, that's the thing that's cool about the hobby, is sometimes the rare stuff doesn't cost a lot, and that's still cool too.
Oh, for sure. But the reason why I gave that example though is because once it became clear, that's one where I was familiar with it only because it was on the checklist. But then I sat back and I was like, I only had the checklist to go off of. So I'm sitting there trying to figure it out and asking myself a very simple question. I go, so does it even exist? And that's why I say when I've got hardcore player collectors who are fully well vested into a network. They've got the network. They've got the contacts, and they've been actively searching. And this is one of the ones that just said, I don't know if I would consider that a grail card, only because it was so difficult to come by that nobody, it's not that nobody knew it existed, but it was like people just took it for granted that like, yeah, you're never seeing one.
Yeah.
So it's like, yep. It's like, I understand it is rare, but you're not getting one, so it doesn't matter.
So one of the things I'd like to talk about, because I think we talked a little bit before the show started, is so in the hobby right now, Um, one of the things I've grown up with is, I remember the hobby, and so does Carlos, when there was kind of pre authentication and post authentication, right?
Mhm.
So, I lived through the hobby when you had to kind of just wing it. You had to kind of just go with your own opinion. And now that we have authentication, one of the questions I have for Carlos is like, what's this role like? Because with these recent scandals and the issues, the chasing cardboard, Rock Auto, you've got the, uh, you know, the MEI Gray, whatever that, the company that authenticates game used jerseys and jerseys and game used memorabilia.
Okay.
You got these scandals coming out with, where collectors are pretty much saying baseball card exchange would be a good example too of they didn't do their job.
Mhm.
And that's creating this impression that, the hobby has no, ability to police or regulate itself and tell what's good and what's bad. And I think, we have to kind of take a step back. And so, as Carlos earlier was, what does he think the role of these authenticators is for the hobby? And what does he think is a rational way to think about authentication?
So let me think. How do I want to present this to you and everybody else? Um, the role of authentication is what it always was. It's an opinion, oftentimes an informed opinion, but it is not infallible, and it never was. Um, a lot of it, a lot of even how we respond to it goes back to education. So I'll give an example. Everybody likes to pick on the guy, but I'm not meaning this to pick on him, but he reflects a whole segment of it. Our good friend Geoff. Everybody loves sports card
Mm-hmm.
investor Geoff. But the thing is, he'll talk about a bunch of stuff. There's a lot of times where it's very clear his knowledge is very limited,
Mm-hmm.
and that'll come off in the way he says certain things. And I don't. And I'm going to give him credit and say it's not malicious. It's just he doesn't know. He's ignorant, and he sometimes he doesn't even know what he doesn't know. But one of the things, like, he'll parrot out the certain phrase. He'll talk about a PSA 10, and he'll be like, a perfect 10, and it's like, well, that's not perfect. A gem mint card is not perfect by
Mm-hmm.
definition, by literal definition.
Mm-hmm.
PSA publishes those definitions. There is room for it to not be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfectly centered.
Yeah.
However, a PSA 10 can be perfectly centered. A
Mm-hmm.
PSA 10 can have perfect corners, perfect edges, perfect color, perfect registration, perfect everything. A perfect card can in fact exist, and if it does, it can be inside of a PSA 10 holder. Any
Or
card that
PSA
falls short
9.
of that, yeah, but it
Or
can also fall well short of that and be in a PSA 10 holder,
right.
meeting the criteria and definition.
Mm-hmm.
That's just ignorance. But we'll use the word because it's 10. That's supposed to mean perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Beckett has a black label 10. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means it's a higher level because you're taking the gem mint,
Mm-hmm.
which is actually a 9.5 for Beckett, and then you got a 10, which is a pristine. Well, the black label is a level above that. Every
Mm-hmm.
every subgrade is supposed to be perfect to
Right.
meet the
Right.
criteria of the black label. SGC has the gold label. What is
Right. The
that? It
100.
is the highest tier of what it is they do. That's what's supposed to be. Everybody's got that. See,
Mm-hmm.
CGC, they've got the pristine 10. So everybody has acknowledged that a gem mint is not the absolute top tier. Well,
Mm-hmm.
go back years, go back to the old price guides and everything. It didn't say gem mint. Gem mint didn't exist until grading
Right.
existed. We had near mint mint. Most of the time it was near mint mint in a lot of sets. It was just like we
Exactly.
acknowledged that but there is room above that. So the point was you would get this pricing in your price
Mm-hmm.
guide, and it's like, by the way, technically a card could be nicer than that. Near mint mint leaves room for flaws.
Right.
So speaking of
Right.
authentication, though, the same people that brought you this is not perfect, but we're calling it 10,
Mm-hmm.
are also trying to authenticate. I won't get into the autograph thing. I did that in a couple of videos. It is
Mm-hmm.
murky waters at best. Using the baseball card exchange thing, though. So this is how I'll answer that piece. Using the baseball card exchange is a perfect example. Nobody became more memeable at the time, and Lord knows I took advantage of it and had a lot of fun with it. Than our good friend Steve Hart. We all got duped, agreed, and I had a lot of fun with that. It was fun, but just think about that. Think about that. That was a Logan Paul case, and by the way, there may be more murkiness about that whole case and the whole
Yeah,
business
I've
liquid
seen some
marketplace.
of
There's
the
a lot.
videos. Yeah.
There's some potential more down there, but let's just focus on the one specific instance, though. You've got a video that lots of people have seen because Logan Paul has a very popular, way more popular than anything in sports cards is going to
No,
do.
100%. Yeah.
Way more people saw that. Way more people saw that this guy could not authenticate this case. But he had no business authenticating anyway. What's his expertise in Pokemon cases anyway? But here's the
Right.
truth. For unopened boxes and open cases, here's the bottom line. The only way to be 100% sure if it's authentic is to open it.
Right.
It's too hard. I know
Mm-hmm.
people who are legitimate experts in that field who would never put their name on it. They would never try to do what Steve Hart does. And
Mm-hmm.
they're experts. They do know their stuff. But they're like, yeah, it's impossible. Like I would never sign off on this and say, oh yeah, it's 100% authentic. No, you'd look like an idiot. You could try your best. Do your best job. You could be like, I see certain signs that are basically that authentication is the art of looking for problems, looking for reasons it's not authentic. And if you don't see any of those reasons, then you kind of have to just roll with it. But if you say it's authentic, 80% of the stuff that's unopened in BBC cases, I'm going to be the scandalous one and just throw out a number. 80% of that stuff's no good. What am I basing that on? Nothing. Just a fact. But I'm just throwing out that it is so impossible. Now, unless it's like a $10 box. If it's a $10 box, it's probably fine. I'm willing to bump it up to like 95%, 98.5%. Like, I'm sure somebody tried something, but like a 1990 Topps box is probably fine.
Well, I think there's, and he has two levels, right? He has boxes that came from unopened cases.
Yeah.
And boxes that are Frankenstein boxes that he authenticated as having the, 36 authentic packs, right?
Yeah.
So he's got, two different levels of authentication. I would assume that coming from a unopened case probably has a little bit more of a chance of being legit. But who knows, right? That's just.
But your caveat is the problem. So the reason I say I would never even want to venture into that world is that it increases the probability. Everything we just said increases the probability that it's good. And by the way, and we on my live stream and everything, we talked about the scenario because at least for unopened boxes and stuff, again, a couple of my buddies have expertise, so they could offer some, give some information. Well, here's our answer. What if you ran a card shop in 1986? The 86-87 Fleer basketball set came out. They have the Jordan, right? The Jordan rookie. Even though, like, to me, like, he was his third year, but I'm not going to get into that. The point is, though, you got the Jordan year with a lot of great cards in it. It's an iconic set. Cool. You're a card shop back in 86, 87, and you're legit and everything. All right, you open the boxes, people come and grab packs, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you've got a case full of this stuff. So as people go and open the boxes, you tell one of the kids at the shop, hey, can you top it up? Put some more packs in it. So you've got the box, people bought packs. You go grab some packs from this other box, you throw them in there. You keep doing, rinse and repeat this process. Eventually, we run out of the season, the boxes sit for a while, and eventually you're sitting on 36 packs, unopened packs, and a box.
Right.
The packs are real, the box is real. But here's the question. Is that an unopened box? No, technically no. But here's the thing. How would you... So if you're Steve Hart, you're looking at this. The box is real, the packs are real. So what are you going to say? Now, he might be able to figure out that these packs maybe the sequence, maybe the amount of packs, because you can actually see a little bit of the card in the back and stuff like that. You can do some of that, but... Or maybe stuff looks like it's disorganized or whatever. It looks like the folds don't match up. Again, you're just looking for signs. But what if the packs are all pretty much the same and they all look like they're lined up pretty well and everything was neatly put in. The kid was not sloppy. He just put the packs carefully in there and they closed the box and there it is, 1986 box. You open it up, you look at the packs all look fine. They don't look like they've been messed with or whatever. Question, is that an unopened box?
Yeah. I
this
think
is a legitimate case where you have all the pieces in place and you could say, but by the way, that was not the original set of 36 packs that were in that box.
Well, I think the hobby got smarter on what some of the things that was being defined as an open box, right? And I think that is where the learning kind of needs to come, right? I know one of your rules is people are not very smart, and I think that the hobby in general has to kind of accept what is reasonable from these authenticators. To your point, there's no way he can tell. So all he's going to say is it's a box that's legitimate with 36 packs that are legitimate. Yeah. I don't know where these 36 packs came from.
But that's the thing.
If you're going to buy that box knowing that every pack could have been sequenced as well as possible, especially in 86, and you're going to take a chance that you're going to get no Jordans because everything's been sequenced to remove them, then that's the chance you have to take. If you go into it thinking that Steve Hart should have done something different, then you're the one that's probably wrong, because there's no way for it to have happened any other way based on what is feasibly possible in today and in just how we can do anything today.
I think that's
Because
the key, though. The majority
yeah,
of the people don't know what the actual limitations are. Like
correct.
if I walk the
Yeah.
floor of the National and I walk by the BBCE booth, there are going to be people who are sitting there shopping.
Yeah.
Again, that's why I gave the example of the Logan Paul thing. I go, literally millions of people watch this guy look as
Mm-hmm.
incompetent as someone can possibly look, and
Mm-hmm.
he's still in business. He's still
Right.
selling boxes. There
Right.
are millions and multi-millions of dollars worth of unopened boxes that the same guy looked at.
Yeah.
I gave my silly number again. I'm basing it on nothing. I'm making clear I'm
Mm-hmm.
basing it on nothing. But what if it's half? What if half of them are no good? That's a
Yeah.
lot of That's a lot of boxes. That's a lot of money on the table.
Yeah.
By the way, they're never going to open them. The majority of those people are never going to open, so they'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
They'll never know. They'll have no idea.
Well, and the thing about it too is that it doesn't even have to be a legitimate box to make people happy, because as long as as long as it's somewhat reasonable, right?
Yeah.
That you got cards from the year that you're supposed to get, and they have some level of collation that seems reasonable. There's a really good video from Jab's family where he opens up, I believe it was a 78 or 77 box, where the collation was just terrible from tops. Like literally got the same 30 players over and over and over, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like fuming mad because, this obviously is a reseal job. This is terrible that Baseball Card Exchange did this. And then he realizes, like, and people start educating, like, no, there was times when Tops just ran the same sheets into the same boxes over and over because that's what they did. Because that's just how Tops made cards back then. It's very common to have got boxes like that. But again, if you bought that box of cards, right, 30 years from now, and you get the same 20 players over and over, are you going to think, A, Topps made a mistake, or B, Steve Hart, who you got the box from, fooled you and is an imbecile because you remember his Pokemon issue, and so, this guy obviously doesn't know what he's doing. That's the difference between educated consumers and most people. And I think it is a shame in this hobby. I will say this, is that in general, you can't trust your to not have to do your own research. Even if you buy authenticated products from a third party, there's some level of research that has to be done internally.
Yeah. But here's the question: what if ignorance is bliss? So the reason I stuck to the Steve Hart example is because the unopened category is a very special case. There is a financial incentive for someone who has a really high end, really expensive box of cards to never open it. The thing about it is that as long as it's not opened, as long as you never take it out of the BBC wrap, you don't have to know. It could
Right.
be G.I. Joe. But as long as it stays in that wrap and that box gets more and more expensive over time, at a certain point, you're not going to open it.
Yeah.
Maybe you'll pass it on to somebody else, and they'll pass it on to somebody else, and they'll pass. And this whole time, it's been G.I. Joe.
Sure.
This whole time.
Sure. Well, I think the other thing to think about too is, and we know this for a fact, that there's a high, not, I hate to say the word high, there is a level of reprints and altered cards that are in graded card holders.
Yes.
That we don't know the percentage, but there's quite a bit that's out there. I'm just talking about total volume of all cards that are out there. There is, a volume of cards that exist out there that are, not real, that are in holders.
Yep.
And the only time those cards get talked about is when one of them gets resold or re-looked at by someone else, right? Because again, if you own one of those cards, you don't want someone to re-authenticate it or re-look at it, right? You want to turn it into, it's like a commodity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the thing.
Dufex has a good comp. I think Dufex's comp is a good one.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was a great documentary about fake wine maker, fake wine, almost like a mob group that was making fake wine. Documentary about it. You're right. I mean, the thing that this hobby is really built on is this: is that the reason why we have third-party authenticators is because we generally, as a hobby and generally as human beings, will find a way to try to rip each other off if we can.
Hmm.
It's an easier way to make money to rip people off than give them, than give people, an honest, or to be honest all the time. And in the sports card hobby, it's very telling. When I first got into it and I had my first bad dealing, and when I told someone about it, they said, "Well, you just need to know more." Like, it wasn't like that guy was terrible for ripping you off. It was, well, you shouldn't have had any. You should have never bought that card if you didn't know what you were buying. That's your fault.
Hmm.
And that is sort of, we do victim blaming a lot in this hobby. If someone makes a mistake in this hobby, we kind of say, look, well, you should never have bought that card, right? You should have known more. You should have done your research. You should have really looked at it. It's partly your fault, right? We never blame enough the people who go out and make fakes or alter cards, to where we need the third party graders to kind of help us protect ourselves a little bit. And you mentioned eBay earlier in our conversation.
Hmm.
You know, sports cards would never have taken off on eBay without grading.
Yeah.
Grading made the selling on eBay pretty much as easy to do as possible, because there was no more arguing the grade
Hmm.
or returning the card because it didn't meet the grade you agreed to.
That's
You
the big
had
one.
an
That
arbitrary.
one is that one is the really big one. I've called in the past. It's lubricant to trade, because
Yeah,
basically it's a way of not having to answer that question. Oh, what
right.
is that? Is that what's in the corner? Can you send me
Mhm.
47 more scans? And use the seller like, yeah, no, I'm not interested in
Right.
having a protracted debate about the relative or trying to come up with the grading myself, as opposed to the old days. The idea of the people who oppose third party grading is like, okay, I get what you're saying, but do you think that removing third party grading is going to remove people from doing shady things? No, we're just going to make up our own grading scale, which is what
Right.
happened before. Yeah, yeah, it's near
Right.
mint. What does that
It's
mean to you? What is near mint for you?
right. Right. Well, like, all of my early hobby stories where I got ripped off is because a dealer basically, you know, tried to sell me something that was not real, or not, or altered, or in a
Right.
much worse condition than was stated. And
Right.
that happened so often that I quit buying vintage for a large part of my collecting life between the 90s and 2000s, because it just wasn't worth it, until grading came along to make this more less arbitrary. I didn't have any confidence in buying cards from most dealers,
Yep.
and that's
And
sort of how.
it suppressed a key point though, and I'm gonna come back in a second, but I just want to make the point into your vein into what you're saying. It also suppressed prices. If people are scared, then they have to factor in the risk, and if they factor in
Yes.
the risk, the same item is going to sell
Mhm.
for less. Why? It goes so we use the chasing cardboard one because obviously a lot of
Yeah.
people were arguing the relative merits. I won't get into the whole. We won't go down the whole rabbit hole. However, the key point though that I think everybody agreed on, and well, nobody agreed on everything, but the key point that most reasonable people agreed on is that regardless of how you feel about it, regardless of where you came down on authenticity, non-authenticity, whatever, if you put the two things, one in the holder and one not in the holder, and it's the same item, people
Hmm.
will pay more for the one in the holder. Why? Because they want that added layer of security. However you want to
Yes.
slice it, they will still buy the other one, but they're going to pay way less because they're
Way
factoring
less.
the risk. They're taking in like, now I'm taking a bigger chance. I don't have that buffer of security or in there, so I'm going to pay way less. There's no way I'm going to
Mhm.
pay the same amount because I'm taking all the risk and I've got nothing in between you and me to
Right.
settle it. Be right back.
Well, but it was very telling to me that when I read the comments from a lot of videos, is there was a hardcore group of folks saying the auto is still not real, right? Saying that, you know, this auto still looks like it's fake. And I think that's a very interesting thing for the hobby, is that, you know, and again, I don't believe authenticators are right 100% of the time, for sure, but there is a let's say, you know, idea that having that layer of protection, um, makes people feel so much more comfortable. So I think we may have lost Carlos a little bit. We'll see if he comes back on here. Um, but yeah, for everyone else, let's see. Yep. Yeah, Paul's comment here. Yeah, I think it's very important to think about when you have. Yeah, there's Carlos.
I
That
could still hear you. I had the wireless, so I could still hear what you're saying.
there we go. Yeah, Henry, we'll talk about that in a second. For sure. Um, that's the thing, like I've gotten cards from a lot of different grading companies where I've had a big issue with how the card was graded, right? And you have very little recourse if you disagree with the grade. There's very little you can do to argue the grade, unless it's just something so obvious like a crease on a card that was a 9 or 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's very difficult, um, because they basically have written their contracts and rules in a way to say you really can't argue the grade, you know, unless you have, there's clear, undisputed evidence that we missed something. You're not, you're not going to get any kind of relief on that. And I think that is, the thing I always point at if I was going to say, like a big factor for me when I look at grading companies is the only company that I know for sure that has invested in money to pay their consumers back for mistakes is PSA. They actually
Yeah, they
have it
got the
on the
guarantee.
P&L. They
Yeah,
have it on
guarantee.
the P&L. You can read their P&L, their packet every year, their investment packet, and right at the bottom ledger line it says how much money they have put aside to pay for mistakes. No other grading company that I know of actually has stated how much they've set aside, to pay for mistakes. Even SGC, their whole policy is basically just trust me, bro. Like, yeah, we'll pay you back, but we don't have a set aside amount of money. Because to me, that's kind of like if you don't set the money aside, then you may not have it when you need it to pay people back, right? And I think that is a big deal. And I think, going forward with grading companies, as a hobby, we should definitely be pushing companies into this idea of like if you're going to offer money back guarantees, which some of them don't even offer that at all,
Mm-hmm.
then you should back it up with money. And I think that is the transparency I would like to see to happen to more of these companies is to really do that. Because once you set it aside and make it public, then it's tangible. Right now, SGC could basically tell you to pound sand, and if you read their agreement, they really can just tell you to go away and not even pay you a dime.
You're saying our good friend SGC Pete will not make us whole. You're lacking faith in SGC Pete.
I would say this is that as long as either you have some angle that makes them feel like making you whole makes sense for them. But I've known people who've tried to get their money back from SGC where it's gone very poorly. So I don't always think that they're going to make the right decision for the collector. But that's just my experience. I buy all holders no matter what because of what I collect and how I collect.
Mm-hmm.
But everyone's got their own issues. PSA is not perfect, SGC is not perfect, but all of them have sort of their own little issues in between. And one of the problems I have with SGC is just that they don't have a real money back guarantee, and their holders kind of suck. They damage cards. I mentioned that in multiple videos. In fact, I just did one on a T3 that was obviously damaged from the holder, where it slid under the holder. Um, so to me, it's like, yeah, PSA's got a lot of problems, but this thing that people talk about, like, well, SGC, if they were the market leader, all these things would go away. No, it would not go away.
I
There'll still
actually
be
think it would
issues.
be very difficult for them to scale. Um, I,
100%.
I have a good buddy who has been bulk submitter with folks that follow my channel will know that I have a good buddy who's bulk submitter with SGC, and like I think the fairest thing to say is that none of them are perfect. All of them
Yeah,
have certain
100%.
flaws and things. And I think if you begin with the idea of acknowledging that, that's why I love the graded conversation is like the hobby's third rail. It's like religion and politics and hobby. Like as soon as you like what you like that, it's like guys, it's a tool in the toolbox. It serves a
Yeah.
certain purpose, and they've all got certain things they do better than others. They've got certain things that they are going to be better capable of handling for you than others. And if you use the right tool for the situation, I think you'll be happier than if you just stick to one just because of brand loyalty. Don't put on a uniform. Just pick the one that makes the most sense for what you're trying to accomplish, and I think you'll be happier that way.
Well, and I do think we talked about this too, is that the hobby sometimes forms teams, right? Your team SGC, your team PSA, whatever team tag. I think that's a small team, but there's teams out
Phenomenal
there.
coasters, phenomenal, top tier.
um, but the problem is that if you make those companies kind of like your brand or your like your personality as a collector, that's just not something that for me I think would be great for any of us, right? If it becomes a crusade against one company versus the other versus trying to make them all better at the same time when they all have their own issues. I think that's the more rational way of looking at it, saying, yeah, PSA, here's some issues you need to work on. SGC, here's some issues you need to work on. But to say like, well, I'm a, like I am a staunch SGCer and I'm going to crusade against the PSA people. That's just kind of silly if you get down to it, because in the end we need an ecosystem that actually has checks and balances in competition. So it's not good for anyone for one company to be the company. But to your point, SGC has never positioned itself to be the market leader. It wants to be the number two guy at best. And look at it's done with the electronics, like with it's registries and things like that. It's always not invested in them. So if they really wanted to be the number one guy, they would have done things a lot differently. And they've just chosen to be a strong number two or number three, and that seems to be where they're happy to be.
I think that's a highly profitable position. Like my argument would be the
Yeah.
opposite. If I had a choice and I was one of those companies, I would rather be a strong number two because the number one
Yeah.
guy is going to take the most arrows. If you're a strong
Oh
number
yeah.
two, there's lots of room to be a very the gap right now is such that you could literally do hundreds of thousands of cards a month and be number two. Well, how much money could you make that?
Right.
You make money hand over fist. So I'm like, so wait, we don't have to take all the arrows that the top guy gets. The top guy is the target. If something goes wrong, everybody's gonna hate on the number one guy. The way this hobby works. So if you're a good number two that offers yourselves an alternative and you control the pieces you can control and offer reasonable customer service, reasonable turnaround time, most
Yeah.
people are going to be pretty happy with you. You're gonna be like the cool uncle.
Well,
You won't
exactly.
get all the flack.
Well, and two, and I think the one thing SGC has done really well is they've taken a golly geez kind of home approach, to this, whereas PSA is by definition very corporate. It's got a very sterile feel. They're not touchy feely. They're not a company that's going to generate a lot of like feels for the hobby based on their kind of positioning. SGC can definitely come in and be, to your point, the more familiar, kind of friendly, um, you know, company, and get a lot of people who like that type of you know I can talk to the owner, I can email and get a response quicker. That's great, but technical grading and everything else that goes into this whole thing, and ROI and stuff like that people also care about, you know that's still something that they're working on. And I think it's just interesting that the people who love SGC won't recognize some of those other issues, but everyone who, even people who love PSA, will talk about the issues of PSA. I've never met a PSA grader or a person who grades exclusive PSA who won't say something bad about PSA. But I will find a lot of SGC people who will never say a bad word about SGC, and I find it weird that that it's like that. But I think, to your point, when you're that number two guy and you're trying to be the paradigm breaker, it's easier to get love. because you're the
And I
underdog.
think it's good. I think it's a smart marketing strategy.
Yeah,
I've always given a lot of credit. It's like there is a benefit to being
yeah.
the alternative. Being the alternative is not a bad place to be. It's actually
No,
a pretty
and
good
plus
spot.
you can kind of throw stones from really far away, right? Without having to face the backlash. But the thing with SGC that people also forget is they did throw stones at PSA during the pandemic, and then doubled down on like bring your cards to us, then shut down within a month, right? Remember that when they said take your
I
cards
do.
to us.
Jason, it just makes me very happy. It just makes me very happy that you're here. You're here to hold them accountable. I've made my jokes.
Yeah,
I'm more than happy to make jokes with all of the involved. And full disclosure, I have good buddies who are involved not with SGC but with PSA now,
mhm,
especially. You know, but it's one of those things where I use them because it makes sense for me here.
yeah,
But I also through ComC, you talked about ComC a couple times tonight. I've used CGC through them. I really like the CGC holder. I'm a big fan. Now it's not the best ROI. It's not necessarily the best move for certain cards, but for some PC stuff, I am happy to have it in that holder. Happy,
yeah.
absolutely, 100%. Um, but the PSA one makes sense for a lot of stuff as well. But for some cards it doesn't. And for those ones I won't use it, and for the other ones I will. So I've always been willing to use whatever tool makes the most sense, and that's even knowing some folks involved in some of it. It's like I'm happy to use whichever one makes the most sense.
Yeah, no, and again, I've used SGC as well. It's not like, hey, I don't like them because on pre-war cards, for example, I actually like everything but their T3 holder for the most
I
part.
think I saw that video though. The T3 holder thing is a shame because I like the T3 cards. We talked
Yeah,
about the
yeah,
whole vintage roadmap I have. One of the things on my vintage roadmap is not even a set. I
yeah,
want to pick and choose. I want one T3 card for my collection. I want to
yeah.
pick one because I love the way they look. I think the
They're
card itself
amazing
are
cards.
phenomenal.
Yeah,
So I want one. I want to select one. I will find the right piece and add it to my collection. That'll be the only one.
yeah. I mean, the T3 along with the T227 set, which is the bigger tobacco-looking card set, um, they're just amazing cards, beautiful cards, and SGC grades a high volume of them. And the fact that I've had this happen to me multiple times with their holder um, on that set, and they're not cheap cards. I mean, that was a Hall of Famer that I bought. That
Mm-hmm.
card was, close to $700, and
Yep.
to have it shipped to me and have the card underneath the insert, clearly damaging the card. I mean, yeah, it's a 3.5, but now is it a 2? I mean, that just, it's not something that you can overlook when you're trying to collect certain sets from SGC. You have to factor that in that that could happen to a card that's. I mean, what if that was a Ty Cobb, right? I mean, that would be a tragic thing to have happen for a card that's probably $4,000 or $5,000. So they just need to kind of fix it. I mean, that's all I can say is it's got to go back and fix it.
Yep.
This rock auto that got graded. So the only
Mm-hmm.
thing I'd say about that is that it's an opinion, and PSA may or may not be right. But the fact that it's in a holder now is one factor in its favor as being legitimate. But you, as a buyer, can choose to not buy it because you still may not think it's real. That's the
Mm-hmm.
only power you really have, because there's other autos, and I mean, I've seen Clemente autos that I'm like, there's no way that's real. But so I'm not going to buy it. If I was in the market for that auto, I would say not that one. That rock auto, if you don't think it's real, I would stay far away from it. But it does, to some extent, show that the guy maybe knew what he's talking about to some extent. I don't know. Does it really matter though? At the end of the day, I think Carlos has it right. Is the whole issue with the scandal with that issue was not really the auto. It was how you deal with adverse situations. But that auto itself, I mean, I don't know enough about rock autos to tell you if it's good or not. I just, if you don't think it's real, I wouldn't buy it.
I think there were a lot. So to in the spirit of fairness, I think there were people who did jump to, they ran with the pitchforks and torches, and they did go straight to Argo, you're a scammer, blah blah blah, and they like pelted them with it. So
Yeah,
that's real. Like I would not deny it. I would not say no. However, I think they decided to focus on that and say, well, you guys all said this thing about this. Like all is too many people. You refused to acknowledge the people that were making legitimate points about the approach that you had taken, and you kept running away from that. You didn't want to acknowledge that. You didn't want to, like, it's like, there's some genuine critiques that are involved. And my relationship to that story was a lot of fun because I got people that were bugging me about it and complaining about it, while at the same time, Mike, baseball collector, who's business partners with Ty and does the whole thing there, was on my live stream, and we talked about this exact issue at the time that the whole thing was going down, and we had a discussion about it, a very calm, rational, so I pushed back on certain things and asked certain questions, and at the end of the day, Mike acknowledged that it could have been handled better.
Yeah,
which is all I was talking about,
100%.
which is fine. That's fine, perfectly.
Yeah,
we were able to have a perfectly reasonable, rational conversation about it, and we were able to ask questions.
And I think the thing that you also point out too is that Mike and Ty are two different people.
They are
with two different personalities and would handle the situation differently as two different people. And one of my thoughts by watching the saga was that Ty is only going to go so far with what he's going to acknowledge and talk about things in terms of an apology. The fact that he recognized in the live stream for 30 seconds that it was a bad decision to relist, at least he acknowledged it. So I think at some point in the hobby, we have to kind of say, you did this wrong, but you didn't scam anyone. And you learned a lesson, and you're going to move on from it, and we're all better.
Can I pose a question? A serious question, though? Can I pose a serious question, though?
Sure, yeah.
What about the Ty Cobb auto?
Well, I think the thing with the Ty Cobb auto is that I don't know enough about what he promised to give it away if it was real.
So I can answer. I can fill in the blanks there. I can fill in the blanks. So in the video, which was taken down, which I have archived on my channel. So the thing is, in that video, he talked about, remember, the entire initial conversation, without rehashing everything, but the initial conversation was about a specific rock auto. That was the initial thing.
Yeah.
Now there was another rock auto. But in the video where he talked about it and decided to be snarky and decided to, which I enjoyed and I did my reaction to, he brought the second rock auto into it. He brought the Ty Cobb auto into it. And in the course of that conversation, Ty, said, these are some autographs that I was intending to list raw as is. I am going to send all three of these. And then initially the idea was, if any of them come back authentic, I'll give them away. And either way, in addition, regardless, I will have these rock cards that are not autographs that I will also give away, et cetera, et cetera. And that was the initial whole thing. So he invoked this Ty Cobb autograph. The Ty Cobb autograph wasn't part of the original story. He brought it in.
Right.
But when they did the follow-up, the two rock autos came back, authenticated, based on PSA. Right. Fine. Fair enough. Some people can debate about that. That's fine. I'm not entering into that space. But the Ty Cobb auto did not. However, we didn't know that until Mike and such acknowledged that after the fact, because even though you sent all three of them away at the same time, you talked about the two that got authenticated and you left out the one that didn't go. So in other words, by your own admission in the original video, you were perfectly prepared to go and put in a Ty Cobb autograph, unauthenticated, which turned out to be not authenticated. So somebody would have gotten a great deal on a fake Ty Cobb auto.
Right. Well, I think that is what we're trying to kind of also say too, though, is that, one thing I'm confused about this whole thing too is I thought eBay had made it illegal to sell autographs that didn't have authentication to begin with.
No.
For one thing.
You still can. Yeah.
That's so weird to me that eBay even allows this. Secondly, is that, they should know better than I think part of the video is, and I think Dufex is talking about this is, we shouldn't be listing these kind of autos that are highly faked and easy to fake. Ty Cobb's one of the most faked autos that's out there. So they should know better, right? And I think that's what a lot of people were saying. You should know better than do this because of how high a level of fake autos for these specific players are out there, right? I think the idea that they left it out is one of those things where you have to ask the question is, was it an honest admission? Was it because it didn't matter anymore because they were only talking about the rock? Is it really something that is nefarious, meaning that they would have been okay with selling it fake? Like if the guy pushed back on that fake Ty Cobb, would they have, relisted it again. I think those are things that are interesting to think about from the video or the exchanges. You know, what are they like? What is their real mindset around these kind of issues? Meaning, you know, the potential chance to rip people off, right? Because we're not saying they're scammers because they didn't know. But once you get to this level of understanding that one of your jobs is to know, right? Like one of
So
your
let me
jobs
let
as
me
a
touch on a
seller is
couple
to
of let me
know.
touch on a couple of bullet points here based on what you're talking about. One of the key pieces was that again, if you focus on the response, it gets
Mhm.
a lot easier because then you don't have to make the call on the specific items. What it really came down to is that you can accuse them of trying to control the narrative because that happened a couple different times.
Mhm.
And one of the times was when, there was a little bit in between. So, in between the
Mhm.
initial snarky response and while they were still waiting for the results to come back and
Sure.
all that, they did the video where they were trying to educate people on autographs. And one of the counterpoints they tried to make in there, a tie, again, as a front facing person on that piece, talked about how, well, he basically said, it's not reasonable to authenticate everything, which I agree. The thing is, I agree.
Mhm.
But I think the idea is you're trying to have your cake and eat it too, and I think it was a false point that he was trying to make because he goes, it's like, well, it's not reasonable. It's like we buy collections and all this. Like, I agree, but no one said you needed to authenticate everything. Who
Mhm.
who said to you that you need to authenticate $5 autographs that are worth six
Right.
dollars authenticated? That would be nonsense. That'd be
Right.
stupid. Business wise, it would make no sense.
Right. But
However,
Ty Cobb's different.
Ty Cobb is certainly worth the
Yeah.
cost of. If you get a Honus Wagner T206 card in a collection,
Hmm.
would you not authenticate it? Oh, but there's a whole bunch of other there's a bunch of 59 tops commons in there too. You want us to authenticate all? No, I want you to authenticate the T206 Honus Wagner. Like,
Right.
use a little common sense. There's a time and a place
Yeah.
where it makes more sense. If you have a
Sure.
52 tops manual, you're going to get it authenticated.
Yeah. 100%. I think trying to slice and dice it down to a narrative that it was just an oversight. I think on the Rock Auto, I can see that being more of an oversight because again, they're much more common than a Thai Cobb, right? In terms of how many exist, right? I think that is one of those things where okay, maybe because it was only going to sell for $60 or whatever, it makes more sense maybe to not get it authenticated. The Thai Cobb makes no sense.
The thing though
So
is
I
that
think
the
that
Rock
is
Auto authenticated does not sell for $60.
no, but I'm just saying that like that the time and effort to get it graded and sell you're going to go from $60 to how much? What did it
five
sell
or six
for?
hundred.
It sold for
It's
$500.
actually
Wow.
it's actually quite a bit. It's not like
Yeah.
I mean it's worth it. It
Okay.
is literally worth it. That's what I mean.
I thought it
Ty's
sold for
argument
150.
did not make
Okay.
sense. Ty's
Yeah.
argument did not because I said there's certain folks that are just general people, whatever.
Yeah.
It'd be yeah, you could get authenticated, but what
Right.
difference is value wise? Not
Well,
much.
it's like I mean, if I found a Warren Spawn on card auto in my collection, I would not get that authenticated, right?
Yeah,
Warren
yeah.
Spawn's got millions of autos that are in sets and in person. But I think that's the thing though is that the thing with the Rock though I do agree though is that he's probably one of those guys that's faked a lot because he's so
Yeah.
popular right now,
Yeah,
right?
he was one of the biggest movie stars in the world.
Mhm.
So the point is, he's so prevalent. He's such a big star in that sense
Yeah,
that the value is. The point is, if you're saying to me that you don't have enough time to do all, the problem is, I had Ty explaining to me, through video form, that well, we don't have the time to do all of this. It's like great, pick and choose. No one
yeah,
told you to go and authenticate every single card of every single collection that you
yeah,
submit, but you're telling me you as a business do not have
right.
the time to pick and choose a couple of specific ones that make sense. The value difference between
Mhm.
unauthenticated and authenticated is so great, many multiples, that it is not worth your time to send it off. And
Right,
while you're doing that, process the rest of these collections just like you normally would.
right. But I think the question then becomes, and I think this is why it's really interesting in this space is, you know, if the authenticator really matters as much as we're saying it does, because it's really about money at this point. Um, I think that just shows you like, in the future we're not going to be able to operate, you know, as a hobby without third parties. Because these kind of situations are going to happen so often, right? That you can't operate at the for really good stuff, like the stuff that people really want to buy, not the $5 or $10 autos. We're talking like Ty Cobb, The Rock, Honus Wagner, Mickey Mantle, hugely faked auto, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to use third parties.
Yeah, but the bottom
And
line
we're
though
going
is
to have
we're
to,
already there. We're already there. Would you buy an unauthenticated Mickey Mantle autograph off eBay?
I think the problem is that some people will. It's funny. You mentioned that. So before I moved to New York, my local card shop was Indie Card Exchange, which is a pretty big shop now.
Yep.
He was featured in the unfortunate Pokemon video, the Logan Paul video.
Oh yeah. Okay.
He was in there, yeah, and right before I left, he bought a collection, and in that collection was some Mantle autographs, and I had to tell him that Mantle autograph is on an item that was made after he died, and it just, even as a shop, even as someone who's into the hobby, people buy fake autos all the time.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, yeah, you're right, but people still do, because people cannot get over the fact that it may be real. I've done my own research. I think it's real, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good deal, and I'm going to make a lot of money on it, and that's never going to go away. So yeah, I would not buy a Mickey Mantle autograph unless it had two levels of authentication. One is I sort of knew where it came from, and it was it was graded, but I also would want to know more about it, like where it came from. Like there's a lot of telltales with Mickey Mantle
Yeah.
on, because that auto is so faked. But that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing is like people will always try to get a good deal, and I think that's what you have to resist, and that's why I do think third parties are this necessary evil, because the hobby really can't operate without some level of protection, because we're gonna you know even inadvertently take advantage of each other, right? You could say in this example they were just trying to move inventory, right, the
Mm-hmm.
fastest way possible.
Yeah.
Inefficient, doesn't make sense, but that's what they chose to do, right? And in this case, you're right. Like two people get a great deal on a rock, and somebody get ripped off on a tie cut. If everything would have happened the way,
Yeah. If it
if
had
it
just
would
played
if it
out, if it had just played
right,
out, yep.
if it would have been chasing cardboard, right? If it had been Bob's Card Shack selling
Mm-hmm.
those three cards, the end result would have been maybe two people got ripped off, or one person got ripped off for a lot of money. Two people get ripped off for a little bit of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, or would have made money on two cards, right? That's
Yeah.
that's and I think that happens so often in this hobby that it's an everyday occurrence on eBay. But it is one of those things that really bothers me about the hobby, is that we have you know somebody at some point faked a Ty Cobb auto,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And it probably wasn't Ty or Mike. It was whoever Rick got it from, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And that's the thing is like it's so difficult, because we're spending so much time talking about Ty and what he did. Some guy faked a Ty Cobb auto, and we don't know who the hell that guy is. Is it Rick? Is it someone else? Right? But
Well, wait.
someone's
Listen.
someone's a
Like
faker.
Paul, I stand with Rick.
You stand with Rick.
Listen. I trust. Look, like Jason, I had so much entertainment value. The funny thing is that I think a lot of people didn't understand that, to be blunt, at the end of the day, I don't care. I
Yeah.
agree. I agree with your general statement, but the truth is, there's probably somebody manufacturing more Ty Cobb autos as we speak, like right now, like as we
Right.
speak,
Right.
and unfortunately, you're not going to get rid of that. And
Yeah.
where there is incentive, a financial incentive, people will cheat.
Sure.
That is part of the deal. So, kind of bringing it all together with your original point, the whole thing with third-party authenticators is it's not that it's perfect, and maybe this would be the way I present it to you. There's an analogy I would use. It's like having an area of a fenced-off area that is off limits to everybody. Well, the third-party authenticator put the fence there, but the fence is about 3 feet high,
Mm-hmm.
which means that you can 100% clear it. But the point is, they put the fence there to be like, hey, you actually shouldn't be crossing this line. We're putting a barrier here. It's
Yeah.
not a barrier that if you're determined enough, you don't have to work that hard, but you can cross this barrier if you want. But we've made clear there is a barrier. So we're trying to
Sure.
at least offer something to indicate to you that, hey, you shouldn't be crossing this line. There's something here. Everybody wants it to be 50 feet high with barbed wire on top, electrified, and the whole thing. But that's not going to happen. So the truth
Well,
is, it's better than nothing, as opposed to having no
sure.
fence there and like spray painting a line, which you can cross even easier. It's like at least they're trying to put something in there. It's not going to
Right.
stop everybody.
But I'll also turn that around a little bit because one of the biggest things going on right now in the hobby, I think, with PSA is this idea that their grading standards have changed, that they're so much tougher now that cards and older holders are losing value. And based on what I've seen, I've had a lot of cards graded this year. I think it's a bunch of crap. It's one of the biggest hobby myths that's going right now. And I honestly, if I'm going to blame anyone, this is people don't do a good enough job of pre-grading their own cards. And I'll give you an example. I had 2 cards come back PSA 6s on modern cards, 90s cards, right? And I'm like, well, what happened? Like, I've looked at these cards. I'm not a dumb collector. I've looked at my cards. These should have been 8s or 9s. Get the cards back, and both of them creases. Now, PSA creased my card. Well, I went back and looked at photos, and they were creased before. I just didn't see it. It was in a spot that was hard to find. But I could see it in the photo.
I've seen those PSA returns. They're fun. When somebody
Yeah,
does the PSA return in HD, and they're like, I don't
yeah,
understand why this card got the way it is, and I can literally see the flaws in
yeah.
the holder from the image. It's like I can actually see it from here. I can
Why
see
is this a
literally
4?
why.
Like, there's a giant crease right there. I can see it, right? That's the thing is that, but but the part that got me was they're so much tougher today that if you've got older graded cards, they're worth less. I'm only going to give you 60 to 80% of what they're worth today, because if that card was graded today, it would grade 1 to 2 grades lower. I'm like, that is such a blanket statement, and it's so dumb because there are cards that are overgraded and undergraded, and every year PSA ever graded.
Yes.
That I could take that same card that you say, well, that's a undergraded card, and maybe get a bump. And I've done it. I know people today that are regrading cards from PSA from over a decade ago, getting bumps. So this is such a big myth. I just think it's so odd that this is now one of the big storylines of this year, is that PSA's changed their standards because of a nebulous statement that Turner said in an interview that now all your prior graded PSA cards are worth less money. It just
Well,
shows
I
you
think
that.
I could be mistaken, but I think
Yeah,
the statement that you're talking about was in an interview where he was talking about packs. He wasn't even talking about the cards.
yeah. He said that we're now enforcing certain rules that we may have not done in the past,
Yeah,
that should have
I
been
think it was a case
enforced.
where the standard was there. So
Yeah,
whenever somebody talks about that, it goes back to what I said about the Jeff Wilson like PSA 10 perfect card. It's like no, that statement doesn't actually make any sense. It doesn't. It isn't true. Also,
yeah,
it's like the 52 tops mantle is not a rookie. It doesn't matter how many times you say it's a rookie. It's still not a rookie.
right.
But it's a misstatement that got passed around so long that people just repeat it.
Yeah,
But if you're telling me they changed the standard, no problem. Show me where they changed the standard. Oh, but this card,
right.
I didn't say show me a card. I said show me where they changed the
Sure.
standard. The standard is published. If the standard changed, that's one conversation we're going to have.
Yeah.
And then we can
Oh,
compare it to the standard and say whether it meets the criteria of this, better or worse. We can argue that. I'll argue with that with you all day long if you want. But if you're telling me they changed the standard, you need to show me they actually changed the standard.
oh, the small sample sizes that have been used to show that the standards changed. Sports Card Dad did a video about this where he said emphatically to me that it's a proven fact that the standard has been changed. I said, based on what? Well, what people have been telling me that their cards have been coming back much harder graded than before, and they used to get this amount of 10s, and now they're only getting this amount. I'm like, well, did you ever take into the fact that maybe their cards weren't as nice as before? you know. Well, no, these guys grade a lot. They know what they're doing. I'm like, look, every card is unique. You cannot blanket statement just because you get 30% tens, every submission is going to get 30%. And I said, look, I've got tons of videos where guys got more tens than they expected. So which one is it? Is it your videos where you have, where you're cherry picking the ones where people are flabbergasted at their videos, or the other videos that I've seen where people are going like, oh, well, I thought this would get a 7. They got an 8. Oh, I thought this was going to be 9. They got a 10. It, it's just, you know, with very little information and data, this meme has got around. And the reason why I'm bringing it up so much is that during my trade with Nash cards, it was brought up as one of the reasons why I had to pay extra money for my card.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Was because he said, well, you have older graded cards. So therefore, I know when I go to resell these, I'm going to have someone point that out and offer me less money for them.
Mm-hmm.
But then he said, at the same time, your cards are very beautiful and look like, you know, they're the grade that I'm buying, but someone's going to mention the older holder. I'm like,
You should have slapped a PWCC sticker on the back.
or a Mike Baker sticker, right?
Should have just attached it to the back. Problem solved.
Yeah, I mean, but that's what's going to happen is people are going to get scared and start sending all the cards to Mike Baker to say, well, my old graded Babe Ruth card is actually a Mike Baker gold, so it should be worth more money. I mean, it does make sense that we're starting to split the hair of the grading world into multiple fractions to get more value out of it, because that's what we do as
it also happened in coin. It also happened in coin 10 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Behind. It's already happened.
Yeah, it does. It definitely shows that, you know, as a hobby, we definitely like to be herds and go in these directions. And it's just so funny that like even content creators who are in this space will go with that narrative, like with very little data to support that narrative, other than I had 2 or 3 guys tell me this. Like that's pretty scary to me that we would, as a hobby, just do the trust me bro, it's real with like, you know, very little evidence. But that's what we, you know, that is sort of, to your point, you know, people aren't always, you know, doing things in the brightest way.
Rule number 1.
Yeah. You know, and you know, I do feel like that eventually we'll slice and dice the grading of the grade to the point where if your car doesn't look like a NASCAR car, you know, like with 5 stickers and a sticker for the sticker, then you won't get true full value, right? Because that's the way we're headed. Or it's like an idiocracy we're going to turn into, where every card has to have like 5 levels of authentication before we'll trust that the card's a PSA and we're $40, right?
All I'm hearing is great future content. Is all I'm hearing right now coming out of your mouth.
I think that the tag future of full AI grading is going to be the future of the hobby, and the tag overlord should be kind of given some tribute on your shows. I think.
Listen, I will have you know, sir. I will have you know, sir, that I give tag tribute every single day that I do a live stream. See, right here. This is a 10. Mm-hmm. This is a 10. And I give it a tribute every single time.
I appreciate it. I do think that, you know, their version of AI, which is, I think, as close to not being AI as possible, will continue to get better.
And right now, it is holding up my drink beautifully. It is holding up my drink perfectly.
Upgrade their
I can only assume the
AI to be Bluetooth, which would be even more AI than it is today, which is wired. So I'm just saying that I think the future for them is very bright. No, I think it's funny with tag. When I was at the National, like, you know, the biggest comment I heard about tag was their holder looks cool.
Yeah, that's basically, look. I've had a ton of fun making fun of them, and I've
Oh
got a
yeah.
variety of reasons why I do it. A variety. However, if I want to strip that away, I had this conversation with somebody the other day, and I said, you know what's funny about this? And I said, for all the complaints that I get from some folks that I'm being unfair to tag and all that. Number one, I've got a good reason because I know the people involved in it. And go back to rule number one. But number two, the second reason why is because I went back just to see, like, okay, let me go back and look and see, like, am I being? I went back and I found videos where I talked about not tag, but I
Hmm.
asked the same certain specific questions about certain dubious things that I had about it, and the fact that people were so preoccupied with the holder that they weren't really
Yeah.
fixating on whether they were doing the job properly. And you know what I was talking
100%.
about back then? HGA. And it turned out, and my comment about HGA at the time was, that's all well and good. I don't care about the holder. Stop me if it sounds familiar.
Hmm.
I said, I want to see if they can actually do the job they purport to do. Well,
Right.
what happened with HGA? What
Right.
finally took them down? What took them down was they kept grading stuff that wasn't real until a
Right.
certain point that they actually had to make a banned list. It's like, well, we can't actually grade that, and we can't grade that, and we can't grade that, and we can't. Why not? Because fake ones are getting through. Well, because you
Right.
don't actually know what you're doing.
Right.
You guys are not a professional company.
Right.
Tag is just a slicker version of that until proven otherwise. And they have done
Well,
nothing
and
that suggests to me that they have done a damn thing that proves to me anything more other than
right.
the slicker.
Yeah, because when I talked about AI in a prior video, where the reason why I said it's a bad idea, right? It's because all you're doing is creating a blueprint for a scammer to figure out how to get his cards through much easier than he can through a human. Because a human can adjust its scale based on what it's seeing in front of them because it's looking for more than just one thing. You tell a computer to look at only certain traits to authenticate, you can make it 1,000 traits, right? But once that's known, all you need to do is make the fake card fit those traits, and it'll get through. I don't think people realize that it makes it easier to get fakes through.
Well, that's one
They
part of
just
it. But the other piece
they
of the puzzle also is, let's say, for the sake of argument, you give them a little more credit than that. And you say, well, okay, but it'll pick up certain things and whatever, and it'll meet the criteria and it'll be more consistent. The consistency is supposed to be the big advantage of this whole thing. That's assuming it doesn't dynamically change over time as standards adjust and whatever, or as the market. They've acknowledged, they said, we based it on the market, and they'll make some tweaks here and there by their own admission. They said, oh, well, if people don't care about this particular defect as much, we
Mhm.
may adjust that. Well, then immediately, if as soon as you make one adjustment, I don't care what it is, adjust anything, the previously graded ones are no longer valid because you've just changed the criteria. You've literally changed the standard, and you've
Right.
automated it. So that's number one. Number two, very simple, just to keep it high level. It's garbage in, garbage out. You're programming this to do a certain thing based on the standard. Okay, you're only as good as the individual or individuals who are helping you put the criteria in, establishing the parameters that the programmers are going to put into the software.
Mhm.
Who is in charge of that? The guy who's in charge of it, who was introduced in the 57-part miniseries infomercial, uh, was a guy who worked at PSA for 6 years.
Mhm.
Was he the head grader? No. He was a dude who worked at PSA for 6 years. A dude.
Mhm.
That's your head grader, effectively. That's
Right.
the guy that you're basing this on. So what if he doesn't know what the hell he's doing? And we're just
Yeah.
programming a guy who doesn't know what the hell he's
So
doing.
so you mentioned like the self-learning aspect. So one of the things I do when I work with companies, I'm a food safety guy. So there's equipment out there that does exactly what you're talking about. Like, so it looks for defects. So we use sorting equipment for defects. What happens is it learns the patterns. It learns to look for certain telltale signs, like you're talking about. What happens is that it starts to associate good things with bad things. So then that good thing that you were looking for becomes a defect. What it also does is that it this equipment, these AI based, equipment, called DUD detectors, or these are based on cameras. Um, they miss things that are obvious because something can be good and bad at the same time, based on location, size, a lot of factors, right? It confuses it. and then it lets it go. And I've seen critical, huge defects that were released by AI controlled systems that a human being would have never released. So, because again, it gets confused what it's looking at because so many factors it's looking for that it said this should have been good when it really should have been bad. And that's what's going to happen with computer grading cards is it's going to be things are going to get through that you would just be so ridiculous. You'd be like, how could a computer let this go? And it's because of that program gets in its little computer brain messed up because it's looking at these factors. And again, I've seen it in real life. And we're talking about life or death situations where something could get through that could hurt someone really seriously. We're not talking about cards. We're talking about things that could hurt people. So like medical devices. So if that technology, which has been around for like 50 years and improved over those years, can't do the job, I have no faith that a computer based grading system that some guys built in their garage for the most part can outdo something that I've seen engineers from ex NASA and those kind of engineers working on for these many years can't get right. So the technology doesn't exist, and that's what I'm saying. We want it to exist because we want all our cards to be graded the same way and be perfect every time.
For the record, speak for yourself. I disagree with that. I want the exact opposite of that, but I have reasons.
You want as inconsistent as possible grading that way.
Jason, it's called arbitrage. And that is an opportunity. If you actually know, I've literally made this pitch. I've always been very transparent about this. The broken nature of the way the sports card works actually works in favor of those who have the knowledge to capitalize on these inefficiencies. Sure. So I'm like, why would I want to fix anything? I want it even more broken. What's the most that we can break this? I was like, hold on, let me go get my hammer. I think we can fix this even worse.
Well, but the thing is that like if it's random arbitrage or random grading, for example, even if you can identify the 9s and 10s, you might get 6s on those cards if it's so random, right? If it's so broken, you may not be able to get it through get it fixed in that broken system. But
there's always an angle, Jason. There's always an angle. The point that I'm making though is the point is that the inconsistency is a feature. If you know what you're doing, the inconsistency is a feature. So the idea of a perfectly that would actually make it less. There would be less reason to go and submit. And again, that's assuming they can even do what they purport to do, which I have no independent evidence they can.
No, I mean, I think this is the thing is like, I find it very odd that they're so low key right now, honestly. And the only reason to be as low key as they are right now is they haven't got what they need to make it work the way they promised, right? I think it's one of those things where time isn't going to help. There is not going to be a time in 5 or 10 years where it's going to do the things that we expect it to do as collectors, right? We have this really high level expectations, and I just don't think it'll ever be met the way that they're kind of promising. I just it's just not. But I will say this is evolution in the grading world is more in line with probably things like visual references, like taking more time to grade than what we currently do is probably more realistic than anything else, but that always incurs cost. And we're never going to be happy with grading if it costs more than $20-$25, right? So to your point, we talked about like, Upper Deck has a budget. All these grading companies have budgets based on their flow through of cards.
Yeah.
I think
the correct answer, I think the answer is going to be a combination of two technologies. It's going to be the individuals who give the final say and a final look through. And I think they're going to use different enhanced scanning. It's really what we've talked about in the past. I think
visual references is the best way.
And it's going to be the machine will be able to properly look at it and confirm it's 50-50 centered. It'll have a better idea. It'll actually be able to take the image and do a better job. You don't need the person to go grab a ruler. You can actually have them apply the card and go like, here's the centering, here's the information you need. You, the grader, this is the
Right.
information you need to know about the centering. Now go take a look at the corners. Here's an enhanced imaging so you can look at it closer. Here's the edges. Here's this. Here's
Right.
that. All right, make your assessment.
Right. And I think the one thing that would make sense when we start seeing this become quicker, easier, and they're already doing scanning, so we know this is already happening. Um, the fear is like, well, now that, and I think this goes back to that whole like, well, that's why new cards are being graded harsher because they have more tools to use to grade the card harsher. I still don't see that. I think they're using these tools for one big goal. That is no fakes, no trimming. That's their two goals, or no altering, right? They're not really looking to see, is that 8 edge better than it was in 2010? They're saying, is that edge trimmed or not?
Mm-hmm.
That's the real answer they want, right? They don't care as much about the number grade as they do. Is it real? Has it been altered? Because that's what's really hurt the graders. I mean, PSA's issue hasn't been their number grading. Their issue's been cards getting through that were fake or altered. And I think that's what they're going to spend all their money and time on, not trying to get the number to be more consistent. To your point, they don't want it consistent, right? Because there is some volume in regrading cards that's out there.
The Krakow game is part of the game. Like
the Krakow game generates a lot of money for them, but they sure as heck don't want cards to be not real.
Yeah, because for them that's where the insurance policy kicks in, the guarantee and all that. So if they can minimize that would be advantageous for them. A little bit of variance in grading is acceptable. They can accept a certain variance. Obviously, the consumer will complain about it, but again, go back to it depends on the consumer. If I can buy a 9 that I know is a 10, all right, now it's a 10. Done.
It's interesting to me that they've taken the policy on number cards, where they're basically taking the photo and saying if the card's ever been graded before, and you pop it out and regrade it, you can't get higher than the prior grade. If it's a number card, if they can find that it's been graded before. That's an interesting position to take. I get it from their view of people altering those cards, basically saying, look, don't take your Tom Brady rookies, buy them in a PSA holder, trim them, and then submit them if they're numbered. We're not going to bump the grades. But it's interesting that they can only do that with number cards, but we saw with blowout with photo matching, they could do that with other cards too.
Yeah,
and they're choosing not to. Mm-hmm. So that does show you that they don't want to take all that revenue and just throw it away, right?
Still comes out of money.
I think it is interesting. Yeah. So, all right, Carlos. Well, I think it's 1:00. I think I've got to go to work tomorrow. I'm one of those stupid people that have to go to an office. So I think we'll let it go from here. But I appreciate you coming on and talking about these points. And you've definitely lived the collecting life around the same period as me. So it's great to have that conversation with someone who's lived it similarly as me. And I like the fact that we don't have the same viewpoints, but we can have a great conversation. And hopefully people learn some stuff. If not, then I'm sorry. We didn't do a good job. But if it was entertaining, that's great. And Carlos, any last words?
No, I think that's really good. Appreciate you inviting me on. Happy to have the conversation. And we were able to cover a lot of good ground. And to Will's question, yes. The answer is yes.
Well, thank you. And I think you're guest number 3 on my show. So it's I'm not a high volume guy. So thank you for coming on.
Times.
All right, man. Well, I'll see you next time, and good luck and have fun. I hope you find some more Madonnas you need, man.
I'll do my best. Thank you.
All right. Night, everyone.